Ladies and gentlemen, the program will start in 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Tina Lombard, and I'm the current president of ARIA, which is the Asian Real Estate Association of America, the Greater Denver branch. Now, ARIA is the largest Asian nonprofit in the U.S. We boast over 17,000 members. There are 41 chapters, and this chapter here in Denver has been around for about 4 years. And we actually support those in the API community, Asian real estate. We support realtors, mortgage people, title, anybody who is associated with the real estate agency. If you would like to contact us, please contact areaa.org, search Denver, and we'd love to hear from you.
The Latino population in the United States is now over 60 million. With a 66.8 labor force participation rate, a combined purchasing power of $1.7 trillion, and now accounting for more than 50% of home ownership growth since 2009. How do you capitalize as a real estate professional? NARP offers the tools and resources necessary to reach the burgeoning Hispanic market via its chapter network, which you can benefit from through a NARP membership. As you sell more homes, local communities grow, Latinx families prosper, and your business flourishes. Join NARP today at narp.org/member.
From all of our members, the NAR staff, and the leadership team, we're honored to celebrate our alliance with you in June and every month. We are better, stronger, and more effective because of our collaboration. We look forward to continuing to work with you to secure a stronger, more inclusive, and more economically vibrant real estate industry. Thank you, and happy Pride Month.
The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They have to be felt with the heart, and that's Women's Council.
I am Women's Council.
I'm Women's Council.
I am Women's Council.
I am Women's Council of Realtors.
Yo soy Women's Council.
I
am Women's Council of Realtors.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us for our first virtual fair housing workshop. We have so much in store for you guys today, and we are really excited to bring everyone together to have some exciting discussion around an important topic to us here in our industry. My name is Natalie Davis. I am the 2021 chair for the Colorado Association of Realtors Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And today we are going to come together to learn more about fair housing, the history, how it impacts various areas of our real estate industry, and how we as agents and brokers can continue to further protect ourselves, each other, and the consumers. So before we begin, you guys should not be surprised. We're going to take care of a couple of housekeeping rules. So just to let you know, here in the main session, we are not going to have Q&A. We've reserved that for our breakout session. So know that after each keynote speaker that we have or panel discussion, we'll have 4 breakout sessions that will immediately follow. Take that opportunity to engage, pose those questions in the breakout groups, and so that we can continue to have the dialogue after the presentation. Also, if you are experiencing any type of technical issues, know that we have staff that is available to answer any questions that you may have. Utilize the chat feature to do so as well. I would like to encourage everyone to start utilizing the chat feature before we get everything started and we bring on our first speaker. Just jot in where you're joining us from today. We'd love to see where everyone is tuning in from as we have this fabulous discussion for the rest of this morning. So you can just jot that in the chat box. Beautiful, I see a few places coming in. Also, I want to encourage us all to approach today's conversation and discussion with an open mind. I like to say with a sense of curiosity. Some of the topics that we're going to discuss today will have some emotional drive and charge for individuals. It may sometimes become uncomfortable, but we've realized that if you go into today with the intention and from a place of curiosity and open-mindedness, that's where the magic starts to happen. And as Jason Witt says, we are the magic for this topic and this discussion and the change that we want to see within our industry. So just be mindful, respectful with any of your questions, comments, and the discussion that we have in the breakout groups. do have to say, if anyone does participate in appropriate comments, dialogue, discussion in the chat feature, we will have to unfortunately remove you from the event. But we want to have open dialogue and discussion, so just be respectful in that manner. Also, before we begin, I want to make sure that I share with you guys the definition of fair housing, and that is now on the screen. So just be mindful and don't forget the unique individuals behind these classifying terms so that we can go through today's content, again, from a place of curiosity. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, that is going to take us through the history of fair housing, Mr. Nate Johnson, who is the president of Real Estate Solutions. Nate is the 2021 chairman of the Sustainability Advisory Group for the National Association of Realtors and has served as the 2018 president for the Missouri Association of Realtors, the 2011 president for the St. Louis Association of Realtors. Nate currently serves as the president of the board of directors for the Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing Opportunity Council, which is the only nonprofit fair housing enforcement agency working to end illegal housing discrimination in St. Louis. Nate, you come to us with a tremendous amount of knowledge and a tremendous amount of information that you're going to share with us, just giving us a historical reflection on fair housing. We are so excited that you've taken the time out of your day to join us. Please, everyone, help me in welcoming Mr. Nate Johnson.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you, Colorado Association of Realtors, for having me join this discussion. I've seen the agenda, it's powerful, and I'm really excited that you guys are taking advantage of the opportunity to learn more about fair housing and some of the important issues that affect our communities, not only in Colorado, but all over the country and the world, quite frankly. So with that, let's jump right in. I don't have a whole lot of time with you this morning. So we're going to have a really brief history of fair housing. Now, I'll tell you, I could spend all day long talking about this, but I won't. I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time and stay on topic. But let's jump into it, because in order for us to understand where we're at today, we need to know where we've been. And that starts a long time ago. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 1865. Anybody remember 1865? Anybody? Okay. What was happening in 1865 is we were at a space where the Civil War ends. Anybody remember that? The Civil War ended in 1865. And the question became, what are we going to do with all of these freed men and women? That was a huge question at the time, because guess what? Slavery ends and people are just kind of set free. And there wasn't really any plan in place on what to do with these freed men and women in our country. There was no, there was no housing vouchers, there was no food vouchers, there was nothing like that. So it was just off you go. Good luck, everybody. So then we get to 1866, 1865, and this is General George Tecumseh Sherman. And he went to leaders of the African-American community and said, what is it that you want for your people? Okay, this is on the orders from President Lincoln. What do you want for your people? What is it you want for your own people? And, what was said is that, okay, what we want we want to have land. We want to be able to, the best way that we can take care of ourselves is to own our own land, to turn and till the soil by our own labor so that we can maintain it ourselves and maybe have something extra to spare. We want to be placed on land that we were able to buy and make it our own. That's what was asked of our country at the time. So it was done. Just that simple. Okay, maybe not just that simple. Okay, but it was done. It was started to be done. So there was an executive order, field order, that was issued. And what they said is that these islands from Charleston South to the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea and around the St. Johns River in Florida, this part of the country was reserved by the President of the United States to be reserved for African Americans, for freed men and women. And you may have heard that referred to as 40 acres and a mule, because at the time, each family would have gotten basically 40 acres of land to till, to turn on their own. They didn't get the mule part, but the land part they were getting at first. But then that changed because, as we know, Lincoln was assassinated, and then Andrew Johnson came into power. When Andrew Johnson came into power from Tennessee, he said, no, we're not giving this land away. So he took the land back and returned it to the former slave owners. So then we were still stuck where we've got all these freed men and women without anywhere to really go. So that leads us to 1866. 1866, we've got the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and this was groundbreaking legislation. Such citizens of every race, and regardless of any previous condition of slavery or involuntary servitude, shall have the same rights as enjoyed by white citizens to own, convey real and personal property. That's real estate. There we have it, right there. 1866 solved it. Fair housing now exists in 1866. Racism over. Discrimination, all of that. Everybody, you with me? Anybody with me? No? Okay. All right. So we didn't quite get there in 1866, but the law was there. And one of the challenges that we had with the law, the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, is it didn't really have any enforcement provisions. It said that no one shall be discriminated against on the basis of housing, on the basis of race, but it didn't really work out that way. But that did usher in the era of, when we were during Reconstruction, what we saw is something very phenomenal. And many people don't know this, that the first African-American congressman was Senator Hiram Revels of Mississippi and Representative Joseph Rainey of South Carolina. They were the first African-Americans to serve in Congress. This was in 1870. 1870 this happened. And we were on our way. We as a country were unifying, coming together to create that more perfect union that we always talk about. But then came 1877. This is Rutherford B. Hayes. He was Ohio's governor, and he was running for president against New York governor at the time. And what occurred there was what we call the Compromise of 1877. The Compromise, and what Hayes said is that he told the southern states, the unreconstructed states, hey, I'll tell you what, if you support my nomination for presidency, then we'll withdraw the federal troops from the South and basically, turn you loose. And that's exactly what happened. The Southerners supported Rutherford Hayes. He became president. And as a result, he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He removed the troops from the South. And in the words of Frederick Douglass, the freedmen were left naked unto their enemies. And that's exactly what happened, because that ushered in the era of Jim Crow, the Jim Crow South, as we know. So as a result of that, we started to see what we know as the Great Migration. In 1910, more than 90% of all African Americans lived in the South. And 50 years later, that number was cut in half because African Americans in the South were making their way towards the North for greener pastures, so to speak, to take advantage of opportunities that were being created for industry and, to sort of escape the oppressive conditions of the antebellum South that they were forced to endure at the time. Now, of course, that led us right into 1933. 1933. Anybody remember what was happening in the 1933? We had some challenges in our country in 1933, folks. Yes, we had the Great Depression was upon us. So we had soup lines, we had all these things. People were broke, okay? So if you can think about this for a second, and if you think about our country's history, who do you think is going to be the first folks fired and the last folks hired in terms of employment? It's minorities. It's minorities. We know that. That's just how our country was operating. And so, but at the time, then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he signed the New Deal. The New Deal was a jobs program, and it put a lot of men back to work. And I say men back to work because women weren't really in the workforce at the time. If we look at even in 1950, less than 30% of women worked outside of the home. And this is 1950. We're talking about 1930s here. So this was a jobs program for men. Yes. And more to the point, it was a jobs program for white men because most minorities were excluded from the opportunities that were provided by the New Deal, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and similar job programs that were all over the country. They were excluded from that. Another thing that resulted from the New Deal was the creation of the FHA, which was the passage of the National Housing Act, and it created the FHA. And what do we know about the FHA? The Federal Housing Administration makes credit more available to lenders in home repairs and construction, and allows people to invest in home ownership with a lower down payment. You see, before 1934, before the creation of the FHA, it was the Wild West in terms of achieving home ownership. If you wanted to buy a home, you basically went to the bank and made the deal. There was no, you may be putting 30, 40, 50% down or more. And it also had a lot to do with relationships. You go and say, hey, me, I want to buy Joe's house down the street. Yeah, I know you, I know Joe. This is the terms that I'll provide for you. It was that type of relationship that was occurring. And then once we saw the FHA come into creation, it did create a way to sort of equalize that and sort of systematize it, I think is probably a better word. Now, it worked very well for a lot of folks, but it didn't quite work for everybody, okay? Because when we go up to 1968, by the time we get to 1968, we saw that less than 2%, 2% of FHA loans were issued to minorities, African Americans and other minorities, okay? Less than 2%. So effectively, that shut minorities out of wealth creation and the creation of the middle class, which was occurring at that time. Because around 1920, the home ownership rate in our country was less than 50%. People didn't own homes. It was around 30, 40%, somewhere in that neighborhood, because it was so hard to get there. It was seen as something that was only obtainable for the wealthy and the well-off. But once the FHA was created, that changed that dynamic completely. And now everybody was able to achieve home ownership. But of course, not everybody. You heard some of us that were excluded from this opportunity, but it did create the middle class. And when we look today, we see over 70% of white citizens in our country are homeowners. And this is in comparison to about 43%, less than 45% of African Americans are homeowners in our country today. So there's a huge gap in home ownership, which perpetuates the wealth gap as well, because as we know, home ownership is the entry into financial stability, into financial independence, wealth creation, all of those things. And if you've got a group of people or many groups of people, because it certainly wasn't just African Americans that were excluded from these opportunities, we're talking about Asians, we're talking about Jews, we're talking about Irish in some situations, Italians in some areas. All these different groups were excluded from home ownership opportunities at the time. And as a result, they were excluded from wealth creation opportunities, and they were left behind at the time and not able to catch up. At least some of our groups, some of these groups that we discussed were not able to catch up because it was these policies perpetuated decades and decades and decades into the future for some. So this is a red line map. So this is actually the city of St. Louis. This is the Homeowner Loan Corporation map in St. Louis, and this is from 1940. And what you see there is the areas in red. Those are areas that were deemed dangerous. Those are deemed hazardous. Definitely declining were the yellow areas there. And what was occurring is that the FHA, the federal government, and banks agreed that we're not going to loan any money in these neighborhoods. So this was a FHA, a government policy not to lend money in some of these areas. It just so happened that these areas were heavily populated by minorities. And that was the reason that a lot of these banks and the federal government chose not to insure mortgages in those communities. So when we talk about redlining, we're talking about denying or restricting loans to or in a particular area or community. And that was happening, again, in the 1940s, 1930s. And it certainly wasn't just in St. Louis or in the Midwest. This is Los Angeles. We see the same thing here. Here we see the city of Buffalo. This is the Evans Bank trade area. What you see here is they show that their area was in the red, And the areas that were greater than 50% African American were identified, and areas that were greater than 40% African American were identified. Evans Bank was not going to lend in those areas. That was codified, and that was not only their policy, that was policies of banks all over the country. And that policy was created as a result of federal government guidelines that were existing as it relates to insuring home loans. Another thing that FHA would not do is they would not insure in integrated communities. So once a community became integrated, FHA was pulling out and no longer insuring those mortgages. And if anybody has sold like a condo in an uninsured condo building, you know that it's very difficult to get financing for those types of units. And that is similar to what we were seeing in some of these neighborhoods. Now here you see the text there. It says, none of the said lands, interest therein shall be sold, resold, conveyed, leased, rented to, or used in any way or occupied by any person of Negro blood, the Semitic race, or any origin whose racial description shall include Armenians, Jews, Hebrews, Persians, or Syrians. Okay, we know that as a restrictive covenant. And what that did is that shut out people from the ability to even rent a home in a particular neighborhood because of these covenants that were on the books. And that was certainly a challenge. You see here, we talk about racism and discrimination. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was overt discrimination. Today, it still exists. It's just covert discrimination. We would see signs. We want white tenants in our white community, Christians only, Jews not welcome, no Irish, no Black, no dogs, things like that. That was prominent and prevalent in communities all over our country. Here's Levittown. This is 1945. Levittown was, anybody remember what was happening in 1945? Yes. The war was ending. World War II was ending, and the boys were coming home from war. And there was the creation of the baby boom when these soldiers in this generation started families. And there was a severe housing shortage. Now, I know you guys in Colorado probably have a little bit of an inventory shortage. We're facing the same thing here in St. Louis, and we're facing it all over the world, or all over the country, certainly. Let me tell you about a housing shortage, though. Levittown, when this development was opened, they took reservations in the first 3 hours. They reserved 1,200 homes in 3 hours. That was the thirst for home ownership at the time. And as you can imagine, no minorities were able to purchase a home in Levittown because of the restrictive covenant and because of the FHA lending policies that were in place. So that led us to 1948. 1948, we've got a Supreme Court decision. So this is a case Shelley versus Kramer. And what happened there is that the Shelley family was buying a home, and the Kramer family said, "Hey, look, we have restrictive covenants. You may not buy a home in this neighborhood. No Blacks are allowed here." It went all the way to the Supreme Court. Who you see pictured there is Thurgood Marshall. He was an attorney on this case, and what the court said, they punted, by the way, in my opinion. What they said is that racially restricted covenants on their face are not invalid under the 14th Amendment, and they may be privately enforced. However, there will be no government or state action to enforce them, meaning that if you want to enforce them on your own privately, you can do so. If you don't want to enforce them, you can do so as well. So they're going to leave it up to the people. Bad idea. Leave it up to the people in these neighborhoods. So it continued. And what we know is that police action was behind a lot of the enforcement of these illegal restrictive covenants. There was a lot of policy that was in place. So although they said what was going to happen, it's not really what happened at all. And that led us into 1949 when we have the Housing Act, which was passed. And we've got slum clearance and urban redevelopment. Slum clearance and urban redevelopment, they call some of these areas urban renewal, and it was dubbed Negro removal, okay? Because what they were doing is they were taking African Americans and other minorities who were concentrated in some of these inner city slums and displacing them. And they were displacing them because, they wanted to repurpose some of this land. So they were displacing folks to repurpose this land as white citizens had the opportunity to move into the suburbs, which were created around that time. And when African Americans were removed and other minorities, they were moved into public housing developments. So this is a public housing development, Pruitt-Igoe, which is one of the first high-rise housing developments in our country. It first opened in 1954. Terrible model, terrible model. You had white citizens living in one side, one of the buildings. You had African Americans living in other buildings there. So they were segregation that was occurring there. And then once white folks were able to move to greener pastures, so to speak, the minorities that were left behind were left with unsanitary conditions. They were left with a lack of investment, a lack of police presence, all of these terrible things that were occurring, overcrowding, all of this. It was just not a very good situation at all. And that leads us into blockbusting, because what was happening here is people were walking, door to door, because now, based on that decision, that Supreme Court decision, there was the ability for African Americans to move into some of these neighborhoods if the homeowners would allow that, and if they were able to get financing. Part of the financing challenge was with the blockbusters solved some of that. What they did is they would knock on doors and say, hey, guess what happened down the street? They sold to a minority family, that the Negro family, right? And you better sell me your home while you still can. You better sell me your home while you still can, at a discount, by the way. The blockbusters would then turn around and sell these properties to minorities at these exorbitant rates, and they would use contract for deed documents, agreements, which meant that if you've got a 10-year agreement, you're paying every month for 10 years, but you're not accruing any equity until you've made that last payment. You could own that. You could be buying that home for making your payment on time for 9.5 years. And on that, 1 month prior to you owning it, if you're late or miss that payment, you're evicted and you've accrued no home ownership. And as you can imagine, a lot of the blockbusters are doing things to trip up adding extra fees on that wasn't agreed to, doing all these terrible things. Again, I could talk all day about this particular as well, but let's move along. Those were blockbusters. Levittown, 1957. This was the first of the Levittowns. There was half a dozen of them. This was integrated in 1957. William and Daisy Myers moved to the town, and you would think they would be greeted by welcomes, cakes and pies and flowers. No, they were greeted by 2 weeks of rioting. 2 weeks of rioting occurred when they integrated that community in 1957. So that was a lot of folks had that experience as they were working to integrate some of these communities, because not everybody wanted them to be there. And I can give into all kinds of reasons why, both good and bad, why they may not have wanted that to occur. Don't have time for that today. Another day, I promise, I will share all of that information with you. So that leads us to 1959. 1959, Colorado, the first state in the nation to pass fair housing laws. And what we see here is that Colorado said that housing discrimination can be prohibited based on race, color, creed, national origin, and ancestry. This is groundbreaking, because this is, like I said, this is before the federal government got involved with this. This was something that your fine state took advantage of and made sure that this was going to be something important to the community. Of course, as you know, it wasn't easy to pass it. I mean, there was a lot of folks on both sides who had opinions about whether this should be codified into law or not, but it did get passed, which is phenomenal. When a Negro moves next door, this is the Saturday Evening Post, 1959. As we saw some of these communities starting to get integrated, there had to be a discussion about what that looked like, because what we know is that many families had never seen Negroes, unless they were on television or they were working, in some location, but never interacted with them. And what the article talked about was, look, they're just like you. They want to feed their kids. They want to put food on the table, send their kids to good school, cut their grass, and live their lives, right? That was articles. And we saw those types of things all over at the time, really introducing people to what it's like to live next to Negroes and other minorities. here we've got, this is a short list of several cities that you may recognize in Colorado. And those cities, what is noteworthy about them is that they were known as sundown towns. Okay, sundown towns, which means that if you were African American, you had to be out of there by sundown. You were not able to live there. You're not able to work there past sundown. And that perpetuated well into the 70s, into the 80s in some communities. And this is a short list. There may be several other towns that you may be familiar with that had those types of policies. So that takes us to the Watts Rebellion in 1965. And what Dr. King said is that what we're dealing with is environmental and not racial. The economic deprivation, social isolation, and inadequate housing, and general despair of thousands of Negroes teeming in northern and western ghettos are the ready seeds which give birth to tragic expressions of violence. We saw those tragic expressions of violence in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and we saw them last year as well. That continues because we're dealing with economic deprivation, social isolation, and inadequate housing. That is one of the challenges that we continue to see. So 1968, Dr. King was assassinated. President Johnson took advantage of that to get the Civil Rights Act of 1968 passed, which is the federal legislation that prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin. We know this as the Fair Housing Act, Title 8 of the Fair Housing Act. That led us into a Supreme Court case in 1968, which codified what the Civil Rights Act said in 1968. This is a case that I won't get into, but it did help to show precedence of the newly passed Federal Housing Civil Rights Act. Which leads us to 1969. Colorado adds sex as a protected class, as a class that's protected against discrimination. Then 1973, Colorado adds marital status and religion. So Colorado is well ahead of the federal government in all of this, because we saw that it took the federal government until 1974 to pass the Housing and Community Development Act, which added sex as a protected class. Again, Colorado, 1969, sex was added as a protected class. The federal government, it took them 5 years later in 1974 before adding that. Then in 1977, we have physical handicap, which was passed by Colorado as a protected class, and again, followed up by the federal government in 1988, added disability and familial status as protected classes. So when we look at our federally recognized protected classes, we have race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status. So I would encourage you to take a look at the equal professional services model. That is a really helpful tool. The National Association of Realtors, your National Association of Realtors, makes that available for you, and it can really help you stay on top of and stay on the right side of fair housing laws and make sure that you're treating everyone the same by having systematic procedures, objective information, having the customer set the limits, and offering a variety of choices. So with that, there are a couple of other things, but I will wrap up. We've got a couple of Supreme Court cases and some HUD guidance that has occurred, over the last several years, which I'd love to share with you at some point. But just to sort of it continues to strengthen the fair housing laws that are on the books, and it continues to show that we have not arrived in our country and we've not truly achieved fair housing. Our National Association of Realtors Board of Directors passed a motion to address Article 10 to make sure that we as realtors are not free to elicit hate speech and those things, whether it has to do with real estate or not. This is a bold move by our National Association, and I'm proud to be a part of it as a result of not only this, but by a lot of the things that our National Association has done to promote fair housing, because what we know is that we're really not there and we've got a long way to go to get there. But I hope that, this little brief snippet that we've talked about has shown you that in order to get where we need to go as it relates to fair housing, we need to know where we've been. And because only once we know where we've been, we know where we're at and how we got here. And then we can take steps to get where we need to go to achieve a more equitable future for all of us in our communities all over the country. That's what we deserve. So thank you very much. I hope you got value out of this, out of the presentation this morning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. I appreciate that. That is definitely a condensed version of the history of fair housing for all of us. And what we do understand is that it is our responsibility, all of our responsibilities that are joining us and those that have not been able to join us today, to uphold the Fair Housing Act. So, Nate, I feel like you are right on the agenda. So thank you for telling us, as far as today's structure and what you can expect. We're going to look at that historical review of the fair housing and the Fair Housing Act. We're going to take a look at where we are, and then later on this afternoon, we're going to take a look at where we're going and what we can do, the role that we play moving forward. So you're getting tons of kudos in the chat. If you're not aware, Nate, if you would be so kind, we'd love to have your slide deck if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
We will have a wrap up for everyone that is joining us today, a wrap up email that will go out to each of you with additional resources and content. So Nate, thank you. And if you're okay with that, I just kind of voluntold you, so I hope you're okay with
Sure, I'm happy to.
Awesome. Awesome. What I will ask, I'm going to have you guys multitask. So what I would like to do is have you share your biggest aha and takeaway from Nate's presentation in the chat. That would be wonderful. I know that you guys have a little bit of dialogue that's going on there. I'll also, my dog wants to join us. I apologize. I will also give you guys next steps for what we're going to do. We're going to go into our first round of breakout rooms. So we're going to have 2 breakout sessions. One will be led by Nate and one will be led by Lisa. I will tell you guys about the 2 breakout sessions, and for the attendees, you have the option to join whichever breakout session you'd like. So we are looking at, for the first breakout room, we're going to have a focus on gentrification. What is it and how does it impact real estate agents? And Nate is going to be so gracious to lead that conversation for us. And then for our second breakout group, we're going to actually look at the economic diversity and what financial factors impact all individuals. And this conversation is actually going to be led by Lisa Haynes, who is joining us. So Lisa, welcome. Lisa Haynes is the Senior Vice President and CFO and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Mortgage Bankers Association. So you have gentrification, and then the financial and economic diversity, as we see it, led by Lisa. You guys have the option. We are going to open up the breakout rooms now. You may select breakout room 1 or breakout room 2.
Okay, maybe I started too soon. Now we're recording. Anyhow, Lisa serves as an executive level strategist, partnering with leaders of MBA's diversity and inclusion initiatives to promote a comprehensive strategy that fosters a culture of diversity and inclusion within the real estate industry. Lisa, if you are with us, I am going to turn it over to you. I
am here, Jason.
There we go. Thanks, Lisa. It's good to see you. Thank you very much. It's all yours.
All mine. Well, I was told I was going to be asked a couple questions, but so it's good to be here. I just want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed Nate's presentation. I just finished the book, The Color of Law, so that was a great compliment to having read that book. And I also recommend, if you haven't read The Color of Law, a great book talking about all of the issues that he spoke to.
Beautiful. So with that, everybody's free to unmute. We want this to be an interactive conversation with all of you. We want it to be an open floor discussion, discussing some of the issues revolving around the dissolution of FICO scores, factors of contributing to diverse individuals regarding accessing funding for housing are some of the few hot topics we want to talk about. But to kind of jump us off, the question that I got for you, Lisa, is what obstacles do you experience when helping individuals in the pursuit of funding for housing?
Yeah, so what we do with the Mortgage Bankers Association, we don't actually work directly with the lenders. So, I mean, with the borrower, we work with the lenders. And so we spend our energy supporting the lenders, supporting them from a policy perspective, supporting them from a education perspective. And so, and one of the areas that we've been focused a little bit on is affordable housing, which kind of links here. I think one of the topics that's a little bit hot right now is the issue of the FICO score and FICO dissolution. And so I'm not an expert in this topic by any means, but I think some of us would say the rumors of the FICO score's demise are greatly exaggerated. At the MBA, we would look at that more as an ongoing discussion about the validity of credit scores and the proper usage of them, both inside and outside the mortgage industry. But we don't really see them going away. There's been a lot of recent attention on the credit score related to focused on the GSEs and the fact that historically GSEs have used what's called the classic FICO score model, which is not the most up-to-date model. In 2019, FHFA issued a ruling saying that GSEs had to set up a process where they would solicit applications for the model score developers, and then they would review those applications, determine whether those were new models were appropriate, and that's a very lengthy process. And so the GSEs also announced that they had validated the classic FICO score model so that they continue to use that model while they reviewed. And so that one of the issues that has come up is this issue of FICO score. It's broadly debated by lawmakers who continue to assess whether credit scores are disproportionately harmful to certain borrowers, particularly predominantly low-income borrowers. And so those with thin file borrowers, those who are thin file borrowers, or credit invisible, meaning the credit bureaus don't collect the data that they actually pay on a regular basis. We're talking rent, utilities. And so there's a theory that by including this payment history for non-traditional financial payments, you'd strengthen the credit files of lower income borrowers. The challenge associated with that is that trying to collect that data will be difficult. Particularly, let's talk about rent, for example. Most landlords aren't going to be reliable in helping us and helping collect the data around rent and whether somebody pays their rent on time, particularly since most people rent from a kind of mom and pop or single homeowner, multifamily homeowner. So, from that perspective, the FICO score is a challenge in terms of borrowers not having an appropriate FICO score. And I think the issue is how can we work around that versus it going away? It's not likely to go away, although someone would like to see it go away. But I think that would be one of the biggest challenges. A second challenge would be around this issue of student loan debt. We all know that particularly when you're talking about borrowers of color, that their student loan debt is significantly larger than their counterparts. And so one of the issues associated with student loan debt comes into play when you're talking about FHA loans. And so FHA loans, which are, the loans that are largely used by people of color, FHA presumes 1% of the outstanding balance as the monthly payment, and if the payment doesn't actually amortize. And so the result of the 1% calculation disqualifies a lot of buyers because it inflates their monthly payment. And so the MBA, along with about 19 industry trades, we went in and proposed something to FHFA to say that we'd like to see FHA align their scores, their calculation with GSEs and the VA, who use a 0.5%, or GSEs and VA who use the actual payment, or align it with the USDA who uses a 0.5% multiplier, not a 1% multiplier. And so either of those choices is going to get lower than what currently is used by FHA. We think that could be a real strong proponent in terms of helping borrowers, particularly those borrowers with significant student loan debt, of qualifying for loans. And the challenge is that. A third one that people often talk about is down payment assistance. We all know that that's a huge issue, but myths are bigger. The fact that people still think you need 20% down to even apply for a home. And so I think, speaking to the realtor audience here, I think that one of the things that's really important is identifying lenders who have those programs that might fit these borrowers. We have tons of lenders who have, and I can't even list them, individual programs that would meet the needs of borrowers. And I think a part of it is really attaching to those lenders who have good programs that are reaching borrowers who are not the typical borrower. They're reaching out to borrowers who may be less qualified or wouldn't reach some of the underwriting standards. So Jason, those are just three areas where I would say we spend a lot of energy at the MBA trying to help move the needle around policy, help move the needle around the discussion to get the interested parties, the stakeholders, to really begin to look at ways to break down the barriers.
Very good. Thank you very much. Questions for Lisa? And if you can't unmute yourself, raise your hand and I'll try to unmute you. Go ahead. Thank you.
No, here's one of the things I'd like to speak to and kind of directly related to this issue. I'm going to speak to you as somebody who started in the home building process in 1971. So I've got about 50 years of background. A lot of things that happen in this industry kind of fall on deaf ears. I'm going to speak in particular to, as we have this current, what I can't label anything more than a stupid cycle. When you have cash buyers buying houses 20, 30, 40, 50,000 over list, okay? They're waiving inspections, waiving appraisals. Now, when that house sells, that is the new benchmark for what appraisers use as the perceived value, okay? For instance, when I was in Bozeman, Montana in 1990, I contracted with an individual between classes to show them how to build houses from the ground up the way I learned. One of the houses that sold in August of 1991 for $74,500 was a 2,100 square foot house. 11 months later, sold for $140,000. Real estate literally doubled in 11 months, okay? I'm seeing these recurring patterns in this industry, and it always falls on deaf ears. You know, in the realtor network, which I'm not a part of, I've never seen them come up and say, we're going to need to have appraisals done for houses, even for cash offers. And if that person wants to buy that house at that appraisal and pay obscene amounts of money over that, that's fine. They can take that risk. But those benchmarks are unrealistic, especially for first-time home buyers in this current market that we're experiencing now. You know, you can have people that 3%, 5% loans, which is fine. They don't have a lot of skin in the game. As in what happened in 2005, they just rearranged the stuff on the plate a little differently. So where has the Realtor Association ever addressed these issues to have some more stringent guidelines to allow a more stable, equitable market for even first-time home buyers? That's my question.
Hitting my big experienced realtors, or even Lisa, that can jump in on this a little bit and help. I mean, that's a great, valid question. I'm trying to write as quickly as I can here. I wish I had, an answer to pull right out of the air for you, but
I'm almost kind of, Jason, I'm kind of wondering if we mentioned the Century of Opportunity legislation that looks like it's going to pass this year. There are some bills in there that at least the intention of them is to help level the playing field in terms of access to housing. I thought I saw Liz Peets in here with us, but I don't see her anymore. But if you would like, I can take a few minutes and
please.
and get the information on those 4 bills that may help, at least from the Colorado Association of Realtors perspective, help answer that question.
Please, that would be awesome. That would be awesome. I want to know from the group what other, again, I want some good conversation. What obstacles have we experienced that we can throw towards Lisa on how we can help? I'm going to repeat the question. What obstacles as agents have we experienced helping individuals in the pursuit of funding for housing? We've already touched on one here in our small little community. We don't have a large diverse population, but the biggest diversity, if you will, that we have is between those that, as Lisa alluded to, is they can pay $1,800 a month in rent, but when it comes down to actually qualifying for a house, they can't do it. So you have a lot of renters, a big, large rental market, and a lot of people that have cash or can come in and pay for those. And so it's the home buyer's opportunity, the first-time home buyer's opportunity is kind of lost. So our biggest diversity group here is a huge chasm between the can affords or the can't affords, if you will, even though they can, even though that they're showing that they can do that. And that's my concern. I don't have a workaround, but that's why we have this class. That's why we're having this discussion.
I think you make a great point, Jason, that we have, I think Freddie Mac issued something a few months ago, at some point during the pandemic, on the number of mortgage-ready borrowers. And it was a huge number. They might have said something like, I want to say it was 30 million mortgage-ready borrowers. And of course, all the lenders are thinking, where are these borrowers, right? Where are these mortgage-ready borrowers? And they had a definition for it. But I think a big part of that is when we say mortgage ready borrower, what is that referring to? And how do we find the programs that these people are mortgage ready for, right? Because it's not the same across all lenders. And that's why I think it's really important that the two communities, the stakeholders, begin to work together on this, which is both the housing counseling organizations, the realtors, and the lenders, to begin to find programs. But as the prior gentleman said, affordability is a major issue when you have people coming in with cash offers that are $50,000 over asking price. That brings the market to an affordability issue. And so we do in this country now have a shortage of housing. We have an affordability issue. There are going to have to be lots of minds at the table to begin to solve this problem of where the market's going. We all know it can't last here. At some point, the market is going to regulate itself with respect to buyers and sellers. But I think it's really important that we begin to identify who these borrowers are to get them ready if they're not ready. And for those who are mortgage ready, how do we find or create the programs that allow them to be in a home? I think there are a lot of people who they're generational renters. And so they're not aware that buying is an option for them. They've just not seen that in their house, in their families. And so I think that there is a lot of education that has to happen around the home buying process.
So I'll tag right onto that, if that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I manage, I'm a realtor, but I also do a lot of property management in Colorado Springs. And I help a lot of tenants purchase either the home that they've been renting for years or another one. And what I found time and again is they have no idea what the process is. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest step that we can do as a realtor, especially from where I standpoint, from working with the tenant for a number of years, is get them in touch with the lender. And most lenders honestly just want the clear-cut W-2 lender, the mortgage person, so client. But there are a lot of lenders out there who will take somebody and say, hey, you don't have a credit score. You've been paying cash. It's going to take us a year to get you that credit score and to buy you at a good interest rate without having to buy down and do all these other things. So it's an education process. They don't know where to start. That's the issue.
Absolutely, 100%. I think it's really important that as realtors that while you may have been working with certain lenders, expand your market, because to Rob's point, there are lenders out there who are getting outside the box and they are trying to find programs to get people into, but the buyers have to be educated. Most of them have no idea what a home buying process is.
Thank you very much. We got 2 seconds. They're kicking us out, but
we're going to take a look at gentrification. So if you are, if this is not the room that you planned on, head back over to the main, and then you can head over to economic diversity. But for today, we're going to have a candid discussion on gentrification. So Nate, if you would hop on the screen and we can dive right in.
I am here. Hey, Natalie.
Oh, awesome. Fabulous. Great. And thank you for that great content earlier as well. I appreciate it. What we will do, we have a couple of questions just to kind of get us started on the topic of gentrification. Looking at the chat box before coming into the breakout rooms, we have practitioners all over the state and outside of Colorado that are joining us. So we have realtor members, community members, and our community partners that are joining us today. So I want to specifically talk about us as realtors, though, when we're talking about gentrification. So how I'd like us to just dive into it, if you don't mind, is can you just tell us how gentrification actually impacts our role as realtors?
Yeah, of course. So I think we should start with having kind of an understanding of what gentrification is, because, it means a lot of different things and people understand it in different ways. So when we think about like the sort of textbook definition, it's really a process of neighborhood change that includes economic change in a historically disinvested neighborhood. I was talking a little bit earlier about how some of these neighborhoods were disinvested. And what happens is that when real estate investment occurs and newer high income residents begin moving in, then you see a demographic change, not only in terms of income level, but also in terms of changes in education level and the racial makeup of the community as well. So we as realtors certainly have a huge role in that. And there's always a debate about, is gentrification a good thing or a bad thing? And what I'll say is it's neither. It is what it is. And I think that what we have to do as realtors is make sure that we are providing equitable opportunities and solutions for those that are being disenfranchised in some of these communities and displaced in some of these communities where gentrification is occurring. Because again, if we go back, one of the reasons this even exists is because minorities and other underserved members of our population were forced into some of these locations, into some of these urban ghettos, if you will, right? And what happened is that now we're seeing that sort of shift back, where people who have migrated west or have migrated out of the cities into the suburbs are now looking back and saying, wouldn't it be nice to live closer to some of this, to the inner city or the central city? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to, walk and have interesting things to do? And that's sort of what is ushering that in what we're seeing now.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that perspective, because so frequently we hear gentrification from that negative standpoint, right? It's always, the great majority of the time. And recently I've heard of individuals that are, intentional about investing in communities and there's kind of a guilt that they don't want to be accused of gentrifying a community, right? Like, so, and that's not the intention behind it. So I love the perspective. It's good, bad, or indifferent, right? It is. Gentrification is what it is, and that's kind of where we are today in addressing that. Great, thank you. Any questions from our group, as just in terms of gentrification and what that looks like and what that means to us as agents? And you are free to, I think everyone has the ability to unmute themselves. So if you want to just unmute, pose a question. I see Milford in the room. I'm not going to call him out. He and I have had many conversations on gentrification, so that's okay. Okay, wonderful. All right, so Nate, let's move on then. I have another question.
I see Kim.
Oh,
like
I had
Kim. Yeah, it's not Kim. Who is it? Kim?
I'm Kate, but I'm sitting with
Kate.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks, Kate. Go right ahead.
I think the thing that I struggle with this gentrification thing, I'm a former public school teacher, and the question we get a lot as realtors is that a good school? And I really, really struggle with that question, because I think, I know what that means is it's test scores, and I think it's really hard as realtors. We're not completely responsible for all of that. And a lot of it is how schools are, the test scores and how the test scores are based, and what people are asking you when they're asking me if it's a good school. There's definitely implicit bias in that question. And I don't think that that's something that can be solved just in real estate. It's real estate and education together. And those two go very hand in hand. So I think
absolutely
I always struggle with, and that's a hard thing. And it goes
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Nate, do you want to touch on that? I know that that's a topic that comes up quite a bit in, not just how we address that question, but really the true impact of what that question means, like the meaning behind the question when we're posed with it.
Sure. Yeah, Kate, thanks so much for your comments on that. And one of the things that we have to understand is that we as realtors are community leaders, and we really should take our rightful role on the stage of helping our communities become the best version of themselves And what we know is that, yes, real estate or the value of a home is a lot more than just the sticks and bricks that make up a house that somebody lives in. It's all part of the overall community. It's about access to shops and restaurants and quality education, quality healthcare. When we think about an equitable community, what we're looking at is ensuring that everyone has equal access to health outcomes, employment outcomes, education outcomes, entertainment and accessibility. Those are some of the things that we're really looking at. And when we sort of boil that back to education, when people are asking that question, how are the schools? Of course, we can't answer that question because everyone has a different definition of what a good school is, depending on where you went. I know that the high school that I happen to go to, it was pretty rough. Now, my wife, the high school that she went to private school and all of that. So we've got completely different perspectives on what a good school is versus not. And, one thing that I will often do is, you can help people understand that there are resources such as greatschools.org and Niche and others that you may have locally in your community that can help people understand what's taking place in some of the school districts that they may be interested in. But then the larger question becomes, are they asking about the quality of the schools? Is that a dog whistle for, what's the racial makeup of the community? Which sometimes happens. And we obviously have to be very careful about that because that's not something that we want to discuss. And what I think we can do is ask that deeper question, what about the school is most important to you if we want to sort of dive deeper into what someone may be looking at. One of the things that I don't think that we can do on an individual basis is we're not going to be able to necessarily change the hearts and minds of people on an individual basis like that, in terms of if they're thinking, if they have the sort of the bias that that if there's brown people there, then it's not a good school. If that's their bias, it's going to be very difficult for us as realtors to unlearn that for them and to help them unpack that, because we're not necessarily professionals in having that type of conversation on an individual basis. But what we can do is we can create forums and we can create opportunities to have broader discussions and larger discussions and bring in professionals who work in those spaces to have conversations to help people feel comfortable about integrated neighborhoods, to help people feel comfortable about integrated schools, and to really educate people. Because one of the things that we've got to, that we really need to make sure that we are creating is educating people so that they are, so that a lot of, when we think about racial dynamics, a lot of the challenges are based on misinformation and based on perceptions that people have because they were told that, they were taught that by their parents or their friends growing up. They were taught that by the media. Okay, they were taught that in textbooks in schools that they went to. So it becomes important for us to help them unlearn that. And I think that we could do that by creating those forums. And we always tie it to real estate because we're realtors, and people will come and people will listen, and we will be seen as the real leaders that we are in our community when we're working to achieve those outcomes.
I love that. Great response, Nate. Thank you. Can you only imagine if we get 1.5 million of us to get on the same page with the same messaging across the board? I mean, the impact that would have on our communities, right? When you talk about in training the public, right, and our role in that, we have a tremendous responsibility and duty to our communities that we live, work, and play in, to make sure that they have an understanding of this, right? And it's the messaging that you just shared. So, great question, Kate, and thank you, Nate. Very, very, very thorough. Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other questions?
Yeah, Natalie, Dave Anderson.
David, hello, David. How are you?
To answer the question too, one of the things that I have done here is just call the school, go to their website, and you can get some of the facts and stuff that Nate was talking about, and let them do the research because we can't, and just be real positive about it. Let them, or go to the Chamber of Commerce to get information. Or if you have a real problem, call the police department or the sheriff's office and let them do their own research without us having to say anything.
Absolutely. Great tip. So these are the tips and best practices that you guys can take with you, as you're going through today's time together. And David, I think to take that a step further, what I always recommend to realtors is, if you pretty much serve within the same community, same school districts, right, for Colorado. And if you focus on school district versus school, that way they can do their research, right? We know that a child is not going to enter one school within the school district. They're going to probably progress through multiple levels, elementary, middle, or junior and high school. So providing that and having that as maybe having a repository available. If you have a new client that reaches out and they're interested in X school district, perfect. You go to your repository and you know that every client that inquires about that school district or that community, you're sharing the exact same resources time after time after time.
And that's going to change because, in Pueblo, we have 2 school districts, and that's it. Besides private school. Where you are up in the Denver area, you have a lot more choices, but that doesn't give you a lot of options as far as housing. If you're going to be within District 60, the city school, then you're in the city. It's just really what type of lifestyle do you want may dictate which school you go to.
Exactly. Perfect. Great insight. Thank you, David. I appreciate it. Anyone else?
Yes. Could you say something about the impact of gentrification on affordable housing? And by affordable housing, I mean voucher housing, tax credit development, income cap housing, public housing.
So subsidized,
not housing affordability, but classic affordable housing.
Nate, go right ahead.
Sure. So when gentrification occurs, then the home values, real estate values in the community are going up. And what happens is that often displaces those that have been in place, maybe because they've been renters, or maybe because it was a family home, and maybe some members of the family wanted to sell and they had no choice. So what ends up happening is that people that formerly lived in the neighborhood or people that were there now can no longer afford to stay there as properties get sold. So from an affordable housing standpoint, there's a difference between affordable housing and subsidized housing. So there are communities around the country that are creating incentives and zoning criteria that are mandating that a certain amount of units that are developed
but you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it,
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything wonderful unless you don't want to store your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with
Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor.
They asked for the same thing, As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I guess. My husband's working with somebody in a bank. We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approved.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out any money unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny May couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Okay, welcome back. I hope that was a long enough break for everyone. Like I said, it is really fast-paced, interactive, so hopefully you guys have had some great takeaways out of the first session and our first breakout group that we've had together today. I know that I have a couple of notes that I'll bring back to the committee for the State Diversity and Inclusion Committee so that we can discuss that, maybe even bringing additional topics to you guys as you share the topics that are important to you. So without further ado, we are going to jump into our next segment of our time together today, and that is our Moving Forward panel. And we are so fortunate, again, to have speakers from all across the nation that are going to share with us how they navigate fair housing issues as leaders within our industry. So I would like to start by welcoming our panelists to the screen. Holly, if you'd start to bring them up. I will start by introducing Obi Jacoby, and he is the president of Windermere Real Estate. He is a second generation leader for Windermere. Hi, Obi, good to see you. And he's actually joining us today because he has taken an initiative to focus on helping guide clients through striking out racist language from property title, which is something that we have discussed a little bit over the last couple of years. So Obi, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Next up, we have Bill Dedman. Bill is not a realtor, but he is very familiar with our industry. So Bill is actually one of the lead reporters for the Newsday Undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. And Bill he actually designed the hidden camera project that you guys saw rolling during our break, and it was called the Long Island Divide. If you guys have not had the opportunity to watch that, it is posted online. We can post then the link is in the video. Thank you, Bill, or in the chat. So the link is now there. You can go and access that. But the project actually has launched investigation by state and federal authorities, and several steps have actually been taken as a result of that investigation by the National Association of Realtors to increase awareness as it pertains to fair housing. And some of the initiatives that we've seen roll out from the national level over the last year are as a result of those findings. So Bill, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Natalie. It was a team effort, and I'm glad to be here representing the team to share it with you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. We're excited to visit with you a little bit more today. Okay, next up, Gretchen Rosenberg. Gretchen, welcome and hello. Good to see you. Gretchen is the CEO of Kentwood Real Estate here in Colorado, and they have had for many years an active diversity and inclusion mindset. So this is not something that's new for Kentwood. And the brokerage actually focuses and has an emphasis on supporting and embracing every agent and the customers that they work with. So Gretchen, we're excited to hear from you from a leadership standpoint on from a Colorado brokerage as well.
Thanks, Natalie. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Gretchen. Okay, and then we also have Chad. So Chad Nash is a realtor here in Colorado as well, also known as the real estate doctor. He is also the vice chair for the South Metro Denver Realtor Association Diversity, Inclusion, and Equality Committee. And he's going to join us and kind of share insight on his passion to connect diverse groups of individuals and communities through education within our industry. And so we are excited to hear from you as well, Chad. So welcome, Chad. Oh, and you're muted. And during the break, I should have grabbed my "you're on mute" cup. I'm grabbing it at the next break.
I said, I love to be in any space where you are. You know, I love to just follow you around because you're so impactful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I am looking forward to learning from you today. So thank you for joining us, Chad. Last but not least, we have a dynamic duo, Ann and Dave Jones, who are owners of the Windermere Adobe in Tacoma, Washington. Ann and Dave, oh, welcome. Hello, you guys. We're excited to have Ann and Dave join us today because their brokerage as well focuses on local communities and initiatives that help in cultivating an environment that is inclusive in nature and supports their agents and embraces social issues like racial justice. So this is a main focus for your brokerage and support that you offer to your agents. So again, we are excited to learn from you guys today. Welcome.
Sorry, we're struggling a little bit with mountain time. Apologize for being late.
That's okay. You're right on time. So no worries, no worries. If it's okay with everyone, we will dive right in. Like I said, it's fast paced and we're gonna go through as many questions as we can and we'll just jump right in if it's okay. For our licensed practitioners, i.e. realtors on the call today, first question actually is posed to you. I'd like to just pose the question of diversity and inclusion as it pertains to your practice, your brokerage, and with the community. Why did you decide to have that focus or emphasis for yourself and or your brokerage? And Obi, you're at the top of my screen, so I'm going to start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, and thank you for having me, everybody. I'm super psyched that Colorado Realtors is obviously addressing such an important issue. This is awesome to see everybody here. So congrats. For us, I'm embarrassed to say that really the beginning was at the murder of George Floyd. That was really I hate to say it this way, but we were really colorblind as a company. I think we knew about things like racial restrictive covenants, but we really didn't dive deep into housing discrimination, what's gone on in the nation over forever. And so after the murder of George Floyd, we as a company have typically tried to stay neutral on social justice and things like that, because really it tends to lean almost political many times. And that event clearly wasn't. And so for us, it was the ability to kind of dig deep and start learning about what's actually happened. And once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. And really, for us, we were like, oh my gosh, we didn't, embarrassingly enough, we didn't take the time to really go deep into the subject. And so once we did, we were like, holy shit, pardon me, we got to affect some change. And that really was the beginning for us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Obi. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the transparency and the candidness. So thank you. Gretchen, you're up on my screen next. Same question for you. Kind of what is the driving force? Why the focus and the emphasis?
I grew up in Southern California in a super diverse, integrated community. And when I came to Colorado, which is now almost 40 years ago, I noticed it wasn't as diverse or as integrated. And so as I started in the real estate, down the real estate path, I was mindful to make sure that I worked as an agent with every single kind of clientele, whether that's, Black, Latin, LGBTQ. I was super excited to just help people get in a house. And then I took that practice when I became CEO to translate that into how can we execute on a company level. I'll say my son had me reading the new Jim Crow, 7 or 8 years ago. And I read The Color of Law and just being sensitive to the agents that we have in our company and the communities they serve. I really wanted to continue to execute on being inclusive and making sure everyone who wants a home can get one.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gretchen. I appreciate that. Chad, you have had the opportunity to enter into this amazing real estate industry of ours over the last couple of years, and you kind of came in with that same focus, right, of that inclusivity. So kind of share with us why that's been a main focus for you as you've built out your team, built your business.
Absolutely. Can you hear me, Natalie? Make sure I'm
Yes,
not on
we
mute.
can. You're good. Yeah.
So Natalie, you're spot on. So I think it was a kind of an intersection of things that led to the way I do real estate. I am a native of Colorado, of Denver, and I grew up in an area that historically was a bit more marginalized from the city. So if you guys know of an area called Montbello, back in the 80s and the 90s, it was historically underrepresented, underprivileged. And my first foray into my professional life was in education. And I always wanted to give back to my community and my folks who look like me through education. I thought that was the key to social mobility, making sure everybody had access to equal opportunities in education. I did that for years and took a turn in my career. And the reason what brought me to real estate was I started to see as I got older, it wasn't just education that gave you life chances. But we started to read books like, things like The Color of Law and things of that sort, where you saw that the systematic oppression was happening through ownership and access to property. And then when you even think about me as a Black man, the connotation of ownership and property as a Black man who has and who has not was far greater than just saying, oh, if you get your education, you're going to be treated equal. So that brought me into real estate because I said, to level the playing field, we have to think about this from who has access to ownership and property. And also, I think that real estate, whether good or bad, and people may debate me, I think has inherently been one of the most discriminatory systems, to keep people out of communities and away from each other. So I just thought like, hey, I can enter this space and hopefully affect some change, and provide more opportunities for social mobility.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. Ann and Dave, I'm going to pose the same question to you guys.
I'm just going to go ahead and just stop right here and leave because Chad pretty much just took like my entire career and talking points like out of my mouth.
And that's it. That's it.
I came from education as well. Like literally everything he said it was like me talking basically. So yeah. So when we had the opportunity to open up an office, and I apologize, I usually let Anna speak first. She's the realtor of us too. Well, I'm a realtor as well, but when we first opened up this office, that's just how I move in general, because I had 15 years in education and my last role was in our community as an assistant principal. And before that, I was 12 years at a school that's right up the street from our office. And so I'm entrenched in the community. I was just at the Y this morning with kids that I was suspending and playing basketball with them, so like, it's just ingrained in me. And so when I got into this space and we were learning about, and a friend Marguerite were doing Genuine Hustle in 2016, and our friend Nate Bowling was speaking about redlining, that was when I first did a deep dive on it, like, what? And I was still in education at the time. And then when we opened the office, I was like, well, I can't be in this space because I have my friends and my group who look at, not down on me, but look at me like, oh, well, he's going to do this and he's now not one of us. So I can't be in this space without speaking on the discrimination and things that have happened, or else I lose a piece of myself and my community, because it's just, that's a Black thing. Like it's, people will shun you and you get it from both sides a little bit. So that's why, I mean, I don't have any other disposition, I guess.
Ann, anything you want to add?
Just that when we opened, we knew we had to do it through that lens. There just wouldn't be a reason for us to go through running an office and recruiting. And I think, sorry, we're doing 3 different sessions around this topic this week, and tomorrow is about recruiting and retention for NAR. But But we talked about it when we opened the office. So the people who came to be with us knew this was going to be at the foundation of the work we would do here. And they signed up, and every single person since then, when we interview staff members, we're like, does it make you uncomfortable to talk about social justice? Is that going to make you feel weird coming to work? And instead, what you have is you have people who are like, that would be amazing. We can talk about that at work. Sign me up. And so that was just how we started it from the very beginning.
Wow. Awesome. I love that. Just hearing everyone's story just gave me chills, just so you know. And the common theme that I see, it's just a matter of rolling up your sleeves. Something that I would always tell my daughters growing up, to know and not to do is the same as not knowing. And I feel that realtors have a tremendous responsibility and play a tremendous role in the communities that we serve, that we work, that we play in. So what you guys said, it's just in alignment, right? It's natural, it's organic, it's who you are. So you couldn't have or operate in this space if it's not true to who you were. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Bill, you're not going to get off the hook. Your introduction to the real estate industry is not one from the practitioner side, so not as a realtor, but I am curious to know, what motivated you to launch the Newsday investigation and start that study? Kind of walk us through that.
So I have a long history of reporting on race and money, including a report on redlining in the Atlanta newspaper back in the 1980s called The Color of Money. There wasn't any internet there then, but it's online now. And Newsday asked me and a team to look at segregation on Long Island, New York. We're talking about 3 million people in 2 counties, a suburb of New York City. And like a lot of places, it's very heavily segregated. That is, there's a lot of diversity overall, but people are in their own pockets. More than half, for example, more than half of the Black Long Islanders live in only 8 out of 200 communities. And we had also heard from colleagues at the newspaper and from others who had encountered problems when they tried to buy a home outside of those few neighborhoods. And so what we decided to do was to do testing like fair housing groups have done, but adding hidden cameras. So, because we all can cite many examples where we don't really believe things are happening until we can see that video, right?
Exactly.
But let me tell you quickly what we found.
Yeah.
We sent out white, Black, Asian, and Hispanic home buyers. And the agents gave unequal treatment in 40% of our tests. The results varied though. Asian home buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, so 2 out of 10. Hispanic buyers were treated differently 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And Black buyers were treated differently 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. So we saw differences of steering. About 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers were directed into different communities and different school districts altogether than the white buyer who had the same price range, the same constraints on their search, was asking about the same area. We also had differences in just how buyers would be screened. Black buyers and Hispanic buyers were more likely to be asked for ID than the white buyers. Some agents would not help our minority buyers unless they signed an exclusive contract with that brokerage, but they weren't requiring that for the white buyer. And then there were inappropriate comments. And I think one of the surprising thing was that minority buyers didn't hear it. We're past the whites only signs, and things are much more subtle now. It was the white buyers who heard the inappropriate comments about race, and you don't want to buy there because of resale value, or the schools aren't good there, or I won't send you homes in the following communities, and then naming the communities of color. The discouraging of white buyers from buying in minority areas was, I think, something that we didn't really expect. And we also finally didn't expect to have all buyers steered around minority communities, so that both buyers would ask about an area. There were homes for sale in And then we would have everybody steered around the communities that had even a modest amount of people of color living in them. And that was a surprise. We expected the sorting of people and steering. That's what we were testing for. But we didn't expect everybody to get steered around minority communities.
Wow, that's insightful. And Bill, again, thank you for dropping the link to the video series in the chat. If you guys have not seen that, make sure you bookmark the link and go and take a look at it. And you know, Bill, you mentioned a piece and having two educators or former educators and current educators on the panel as well. And in the gentrification breakout group, education in schools came up quite a bit. So what comes up for me is that may be a topic of discussion that we have to look into moving forward, because it's kind of a loophole, right? If we look at education or the types of schools or the better schools and communities, it plays an important role. It's not blatant, it's not a billboard, it's not a sign, but it's definitely playing a role in how we're seeing our communities come together. Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. So I'm a fairly positive and optimistic person as it comes to outlook. So as we go into this discussion, I'd love to hear, like, what is that ideal utopic picture of fair housing within our industry? Like, what does that look like to you? And Obi, I'll bring it back around and have you kick us off with that question.
In all seriousness, Bill, by the way, thank you very much for doing that that report. It was incredible. And again, I'm a little bit embarrassed because when it came out, we sent it around to all of our people without a whole lot of thought. We're like, hey, you guys, you should watch this, watch it in all of your offices and then go do something. And that was just kind of a dumb way to do it. And so my utopian is almost Dave and Ann's office. I meant to foster the kind of relationship that they have with their people, where it's open and people are willing to talk about what the real deal is. That is super cool to me. And so, if I could foster that kind of inclusion in all of our offices, if I could erase the biases in steering, or at least acknowledge them, and we all have an understanding of that. If I could create equal opportunity so people can build generational wealth through home buying in every neighborhood, those are some of my utopian moments. And for me, it's really about creating an open mind and the ability for people to have access to learning and really understanding what they're learning. This is historical stuff. This isn't BS that we're trying to force on people. It's happened and is still happening. So that's mine.
Hey, Natalie, I asked Obi yesterday, I was like, so can I be like super transparent in this call? Is that going to be okay? Like, do we need to talk? And he's like, go.
I hope he said yes, because
he's like, nothing's off the table. And I want to mention this because that's the approach that he's taken with this that has made such an impression on us. When we opened the office and I said, do you mind if I tell this story? And he was like, nope, you go right ahead. When we opened the office, we sat down with Obi and Jeff and Jill, the owners of Windermere, and said, hey, we're really passionate about this. So like, these are the conversations that are going to come out of our office, which means they're going to have your name attached to it. And like, are you ready for that? Are you cool? Do you have our back on this? And they're very good about supporting individual owners and how they want to operate their offices. So I think they said, yes, of course, you're owners, you do what you want to do. I don't know that they could have anticipated, to what level, right? But like when we printed Dave's project last year, when we printed Black Lives Matter hoodies with a company logo on it, guess who ordered some and had our back? And, there was never a question, right? Like the way that they have risen to meet us has made such an impression on me as somebody who's been in real estate for 15 years.
Just last night, I had someone text me about the t-shirts. He's like, hey, you guys still selling these? I was like, oh yeah, you can get them at it. And he was like, that's so cool that they allowed you to do that. And so Obi, I just wanted to give you that heads up. That was one of my friends in high school.
Yeah, thanks.
But I think the bigger thing is the change that I see, like the reason we can do that is because Obi and Dave have been working together really closely on some company initiatives. And I think it still boils down to relationships. Like I feel like we've had these meaningful conversations because he's taken the time to really get to know where people are coming from, to listen to people. So to me, the utopia is both within our office, within our larger organizations, within our realtor association, within our communities, that people can show up exactly as they are to their work, be accepted, have an opportunity to succeed in this career, and have an opportunity to be a homeowner. And we are a long way from there. So like the actual structural and systemic work that we need to do, like that's what orgs like this have to figure out. I know we're pushing our local association. We've been doing work with our state association. I know there's lots happening at the national association, but I mean, we got to move. Last year was the year where a lot of people, it hit them in the heart. Now it's about how do we actually affect systemic change. And we have to carry that forward, because there are a lot of studies and conversations about how white people's will to make this change happen has fallen off in a very short period of time. And so we've got to move forward quickly.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And what I hear is you guys are kind of on path for that utopic, right? I mean, you, with the support that you have and the support that you're providing for your agents, in turn giving them the tools that they need to support their clients, and again, having the impact in the community. You guys are right on path with that already. Not saying that the work is done, but you're definitely seeing some progress.
And your brokers pick it up and carry it, right? It's not just mine and Dave's work. It's not just our mission as the owners of the brokerage. You know, then you start to layer in, we're off this Friday for in recognition of Juneteenth. And that's our team, you know, really recognizing that that's important. And that's us then in our weekly meeting saying, don't just take the day off, right? Classic holiday talk, which is go out and spread the history, deepen your understanding, speak to your community, you know, take that time to do something more with that. That's why we're doing this. So if it feels like a lot, it's like it starts with you, but then when you recruit in and you're aligning with the right people, they carry it forward.
Beautiful. Fabulous. Thank you. I appreciate it. Chad, I'll just go in reverse order. I'll have you up next. Kind of tell me, Chad, what that utopic real estate industry that is inclusive and diverse, what does that look like for you?
Absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying I'm always very skeptical about utopian ideas, right? Because I try to be realistic. But let me say this, Obi, just hearing what you said, and Ann following up on that, salute to you guys. I mean, that's powerful, coming all the way from you know, the CEO level. Also Gretchen, having those, that's big, because I can't necessarily say that I'm currently at a firm that espouses it in that way. They're not against it, but it's not like, hey, you know, this is what we walk and talk on. I think for me, and I've been blessed, and Natalie, you know this, to kind of follow in your footsteps into Smedra on our DEI committee, and starting to think about what is that what do I really want to see? Like, what can really change? Because we're in a industry that has so many hurdles and so much oppression that's historical that it's not going to change overnight. But and you know this, Natalie, and I'll give a shout out to Smedra and our chair, who kind of pushed the Fair Haven simulation, right? And the reason why I thought that was impactful, and the reason why I keep thinking, how do you make that bigger and how do you put that in brokerages? I simply want to see folks in this industry acknowledge, and this is the word you use, Obi, acknowledge privilege, and acknowledge whether it's unconscious or conscious discriminatory actions. That's it. I mean, because if we can start to look at each other and say, you know what, I'm from Cherry Creek, which was all white, and you know, I didn't have to go to Montbello, or I'm from Montbello and we didn't interact with Cherry Creek. How does that impact our schema and our worldview on how we interact with people and our clients now? Sometimes it's not just we're doing it purposefully, it's just we have not, you know, taken our mind to a place that allows new trains of thought, and having exercises like Fair Haven, how to uncover privilege and your biases. I think that that's the first step of creating this utopian vision. And I would love to see more brokerages kind of take that mission on, help your agents uncover those. Because again, it's not the agents that they don't want to not come to Montbello. They don't know anything about Montbello. They don't know anything about Park Hill. You know, they know about wherever they grew up, and that's their network, and that's their network of agents. So I would just say that the acknowledgement piece would be utopian at this point for me.
Fabulous. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate that. And I think that a key piece comes out of even our time together today. For those that are taking time to visit and listen in with the panelists and the speakers that we have, sometimes it's just a matter of starting the conversation, right? And so I think that there are a ton of conversation starters for those that are in leadership roles that are on the call today, those that are owners and brokers, or even just agents that want to continue to move forward and bring this conversation into the office space. I think there are a ton of topics that we have already covered and that we'll continue to cover that just create the conversation starters, right? You can't continue to move the ball down the field if you're not willing to just have that candid, open conversation from a place of curiosity and with respect, as we started today off with. So thank you, Chad. I appreciate that. Gretchen, same question that I'm posing to you. What does that utopic environment look like in our industry?
You know, everyone has such great points. And I think for me, there are three things, and kind of leading off of what Chad talked about, the awareness is huge. And then there's the, what do we do about it? And it's really incumbent on company leaders like Obi and I to figure out, what do we do about it? One thing that I'm super concerned about right now is where those hidden systemic biases are and how do we root them out? For instance, we're seeing a lot of appraisal waivers. And so I've been asking lenders and underwriters, like, how are you deciding who gets an appraisal waiver? Is there some sort of systemic bias kind of lodged in that system? And they're saying to me, well, no, it's automatic. And I'm like, yeah, automatic was built by humans. And so how do we figure out where we get rid of kind of that sort of built-in systemic bias? That's one thing I would like to see us work on. Another is this whole idea of like good schools, bad schools. And Chad, you kind of talked about that. Listen, my son went to East High School. And if you know Denver, super integrated school, right on Colfax. And he had an amazing education. And my sister taught at Harrington Elementary, if you know Denver, the old Harrington Elementary, fantastic teacher, committed and passionate teacher. So you can get a good education wherever you are, as long as we can help those communities learn how to ask for a good education. And that I don't want to see impact us like in Bill's expose, where we're driving people around to. And then the last is back on education. How do we educate young people in communities that aren't accustomed to homeownership? What homeownership can do for their lives and how to get them ready for that. So, you know, how do you take care of a house? What is a mortgage? How do you get a good credit score? All of those types of things that can help the next generation actually realize that dream. Those are my kind of three biggies.
I love that, Gretchen. And I'm going to do a plug for our state association on that piece, because this year, the Colorado Association of Realtors was able to introduce the Century of Opportunities package before the session wrapped up last week. And in that, there is a bill that addresses specifically education for our young people. When I say young people, grade school age, right? And that's where it comes down. We have to continue to educate. And I think there's education that needs to be involved in multiple generations, right? Not just the younger ones that are in school. We have consumers or potential consumers out there that are in their 20s and 30s that are terrified about buying because they don't have the example or the knowledge or the expertise, and nor do they have a mentor that will explain to them what home ownership really means. Dave, I think you touched on the generational wealth, and Obi as well, like that generational wealth that you have the opportunity to build through real estate. There are tremendous opportunities being missed. And a lot of that does come back to the education piece. So I appreciate that, Gretchen. Bill, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going off script, but I know that you're prepared to answer it because I've had the opportunity to visit with you before. So I actually want to bring it back because you've had this, with the study, it was not a 30-day, 60-day, 90 study or investigation that you had. So you've had this opportunity to get very familiar with our industry. As far as looking at realtors moving forward, what are some tips or advice that you would give us from an outside perspective? I think would be great.
I'm glad that you've had a focus on history this morning in your previous panel, and because it is, I mean, I think it can be a little daunting that it's such a long self-perpetuating cycle, right? Lower values, lower appreciation in minority areas happen partly because of steering and redlining and lowball appraisals. But then that lower appreciation and lower values can be used to justify steering and redlining and lowball appraisals, right? And it's hard to change a system from the bottom. That's the sort of defeatist view of things. The Fair Housing Act was intended to break that cycle and to break up segregation. Walter Mondale died recently. He said it's the law we never enforced. He wrote the law. I think some education for realtors is very important. I'm a big fan of Fairhaven, the simulation, which is really trying to teach empathy in addition to the law. I'm a fan of increased enforcement. I think it would be valuable if this moved from a PR problem in the executive suite to being a risk management problem. And besides, I think we've all seen that diversifying your workforce, which is often suggested as a solution to this, has many benefits, but is not a cure-all for steering. We saw steering by real estate agents of all backgrounds. So in New York, about 100 professionals are in danger of losing their licenses because of our investigation. That's not only 30-some agents, but also their brokers, and it's often more than one broker. So I think putting the license that you want to keep, the risk management piece front and center, I think has a better long-term prospect of keeping the attention of executive suites focused on this. For example, I wonder whether brokers really make any effort to know whether steering is happening in their offices. Brokers, do you check on which listings the agents give to customers and which neighborhoods and schools, and what other areas might have matched up with the customer's actual criteria? Do you have any tools for monitoring to even know whether steering is happening, short of, well, we got tested and we flunked our test and now it's too late to do anything? Also, do brokers have clear rules for qualifying customers? I mean, it's perfectly okay to require pre-approval of everyone. And it's perfectly okay to require pre-approval of no one because, hey, they'll come in, they'll get educated, they'll become customers as buyers. The problem happens, as you know, is when you require it or you encourage it, but then you can let it slide for some. And, as a broker, do you have confidence that two different agents are going to apply that standard in the same way? Do you ask credit scores and incomes and jobs from everybody? Do you require a exclusive agreement with your brokerage from everybody or from no one? In between is where the problems happen. So I think, if you want to stop speeding, you put some officers out on the road and you write a few tickets and it has a deterrent value. So I put some value in state enforcement, fair housing enforcement, media enforcement, some value in like the conversations that the current administration is having with the appraisal industry, trying to change some things in the appraisal industry from the top. It's hard to change from the bottom. But I think long-term, educating brokers, not just about the history and the effects of segregation, not just on the point that, hey, realtors are not experts in schools and school test scores don't tell you which schools are the best schools. We need a lot of education on schools. But I think what will keep the fire lit is this idea that enforcement might cause you to lose your license. I think that increased testing in every state is likely to be key.
And Bill, you haven't shared this, but you are aware of testing that is still happening in multiple states. So this is not a Long Island issue. I've heard some members of leadership that have said this could have happened in any community, right? I think if this same investigation was done here in Colorado, in Washington, and we have some folks from Arizona, in any of our communities, we could have probably seen similar results. So we need to make sure, like you said, putting in that system where we have checks and balances. If you are a leader and you own a brokerage or you're a managing broker, do you have steps in place to know if your agents are steering, right? Like how are we going back to check that?
Yeah, one comment on that. NAR has a program underway now to help brokerages that want to test their own agents. And you might think, well, there wouldn't be any such brokerages. But the CEO of Realogy, the largest real estate company in America, which owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and Sotheby's International, said, yes, we should be testing our own agents. That should be part of being one of our agents, is knowing we might test you for fair housing compliance. And NAR said, well, we'll meet you halfway and help you work that out. Your association could be testing. I've heard from Washington State, from Delaware, from Buffalo, New York. I've heard from real estate associations that are beginning to do testing of agents. Now that's voluntary testing. The brokerage has to sign up for it. You wouldn't see it on YouTube. It's private testing, but still there's accountability there because ultimately a position with a firm rests on it.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. We are down to our last few moments together, so I'm going to couple a few questions together. Obi, I'm going to come back and start with you. Can you give us 2 to 3 initiatives that you're working on that we could equip some of the attendees with today? And as a wrap up to that, what are maybe the last words that you would give everyone that's able to join us today? Something that they can do, like a tip that they can implement or utilize to continue to create this inclusive and diverse space that we're all striving for.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Oh man, I told Dave and Ann last night that I'm a shoot, ready, aim kind of person. And so things just don't happen as fast as I want. And so I got a lot of initiatives that we're trying to do, but I'll give you a couple that I think are really important. Number one, we've partnered with a community development lending institution in Washington. We're looking for others. So if Colorado, if you have them that fit this bill, I would love to talk to them, but we're starting a down payment assistance fund called the Black Housing Fund that specifically helps people in the 80 to 120% of median income, which is kind of a donut hole of people who have enough money to pay for mortgage but can't save for the down payment for a home. So we believe in increasing home ownership to the BIPOC community, and that's a big initiative for us. And I want to do it across our 10 states. Right now, we're starting in Washington. We've partnered with the University of Washington to have scholarships for people of color, students of color that are going through the School of Built Environments, which is specifically architecture, real estate, engineering, things like that. And coupled with that, we will have those students as summer interns in our real estate offices and at our franchisor to learn about real estate and think about real estate as a career. Like, hey, we have a great industry. You should learn about it. You should be part of it because our industry is specifically very white, and we need to change that. And we should do that both at Dave will probably talk about what he's doing at the high school level, but we're trying to do it at the college level. And then lastly, actually, Dave has started a program. I'm stealing your thunder, probably, Dave. We are doing scholarships for individual people who want to get into real estate. And trying to coach them into a successful career. And we think that's important. Bias training. I mean, there's so much that we're trying to accomplish. We're just trying to, the big issue, and what I'll leave with everybody on this is that I operate a very large organization across a diverse set of geography, 10 states. And you can imagine people's willingness to be open and to learn. Some places we get hate mail, and some places they are saying we're not giving them enough meat. And so the balance for everybody on this call is we got to meet people where they are. And if I say white privilege to somebody, they might say, damn it, I'm not privileged. I work my ass off, because they haven't done the work to know what that means. And so I have to be really careful and lead them into the conversation and give them the tools necessary to learn about what this is, what's going on, and how can we open up and be better as human beings. And so I think that the advice is meet people where they are and hopefully lead them into better understanding.
Well, I appreciate that, Obi. Thank you. I got excited in just hearing the initiatives as well and the focus. So thank you for sharing that. And looking at the chat, there are a couple of people that are already raising their hands to assist. So when we send up the wrap-up email, if it's okay with everyone on the panel, we'll make sure that we include your contact information so that those individuals that are wanting to help, take next steps, take the action, they'll have the ability to connect with you. So thank you, Obi. I appreciate it. Okay, Gretchen, I'm going to toss it to you. Same question. A couple of initiatives that you're currently working on, and what are some tips that you would leave us with today?
So something super simple that we just did this year was we translated our buyer books and our listing books into Spanish for our agents who are Spanish speaking. And we'll do that for anyone with any language. So I was speaking with a Vietnamese woman recently and said, hey, if you join Kentwood, I'll translate our stuff into Vietnamese for you, for your clientele. So that's like super easy and basic and just helps the agents sell to their clientele. So that's one thing we've done. I've been asked to join the board of directors of a national foundation. I can't say who it is yet, but it's a foundation for housing equity. And we are going to nationally be working on solving this problem from an education standpoint and from grants, giving grants to people who are in marginalized communities. I'm super excited about that. And then we have regular ongoing diversity, equity, inclusion conversations at the company. We've had a number of all company meetings where we've had AAPI agents, LGBTQ agents, Black, anyone, Hispanic, Latin, and just have a lot of conversations. It's been really vulnerable. They've really opened up on how they feel, and everyone's given them a big virtual hug because we've still been on Teams. And so we're just going to keep those conversations going so that we're aware. And Bill, I think you're absolutely right. We got to do that kind of more. Are you pre-qualifying everyone exactly the same? We tell them that, but are we checking back on it? I'm going to take that and do something with it.
Fabulous. I appreciate that. Thank you, Gretchen. And we're excited to hear about your appointment. So we'll keep our ears open, and congratulations in advance. Chad, same question. And from the agent standpoint, team leader standpoint, I think this is great. We have a lot of just we have a lot of realtors that are not in a position of leadership. So what are some initiatives that you're working on and some tips that you would give realtors that are on the call today?
Yeah, I would say one informal, going to your point, Natalie, of the team leader. I'm very intentional about how our team is diversified. We are a predominantly, this may not be a big shock to a lot of people, but we're predominantly a team of color and a team of women. So for me, that represents, you, as Obi said, when you think about giving scholarships to people to go into real estate, it's just systematic. You have to bring in people into this industry that look like the communities that are being impacted the most. So that's been informally a mission of mine, but I would say formally, from an agent standpoint, I started at the beginning of the year, going back and doing speaking, and one of the main topics that I speak to organizations about, and I'm doing this tomorrow for a senior citizen group, is how to leverage equity. Because as we know here in Denver, when we talk about like the gentrification and whatnot, is a lot of times because people don't know how to protect the equity within their house. And they just think, oh, well, we're going to sell. We get offered something and we're going to sell it to an investor. And then they see their house next year at $1 million. And they're like, well, why didn't that happen for me? And so I'm really big on how do we protect our equity and how do you keep your homes which I guess is contrary to what we do in real estate, is to help sell, is really how do you keep your home and protect your equity, and how do you work kind of in a reverse manner from a real estate perspective. I did partner with a young lady who translated, so it's similar to what you guys did, Gretchen, but it's for our website. I'm asking her to look at our website to make sure that is very accessible. This came because I was working with a client who was had vision impairments, right? And I realized like, oh, she's not able to really look at things the same way as somebody who has the privilege of having, full visual capacity. So she's looking at our website from like a visual standpoint and from a hearing standpoint to see how we can make that more accessible. And then similar to what Obi had mentioned, I'm partnering on a real estate level with First Bank here in Denver as one of their path agents, which is providing access to home ownership. And that is geared towards Black home buyers within the Denver metro area. And it's a down payment assistance program, grant program. And they also cover things like earnest money, inspection, and potentially appraisal. So really excited to get involved with that and bring it to our community.
Wow, impressive. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. Dave, I'll turn it over to you. Same question. And you may take some of Ann's answers, but that's okay. Like a few initiatives that you guys are currently working on, and tips or advice that you would give the attendees that are joining us today.
Well, and Ann's along with us as well. She just had to move to another room so we could do the breakout session. So I'll let Ann lead on this, and I have a second one.
Okay.
I think I already shared, Dave, and I hope you're going to talk about the high school program that you're working on. Okay, go for it.
So in a LinkedIn article I wrote last.
Well, he's not out, but he's not in either.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
and I'm not.
Take care of it. We have a ton of people behind the scenes. It's great. You go right ahead.
Zoom bingo. We just checked one off. All right. So. Yes. Anyway, in an article I wrote, I talked about education. We brought that up earlier about education, and I like to hear that Colorado is doing things on that front. And so what I would like is, there needs to be more education at the high school level around financial, wealth building, entrepreneurship, all of those things. And so I started a club with a friend of mine who's inside of the district. Earlier this year, we actually in the pandemic had the biggest club in the district of 300 plus kids who signed up for financial and entrepreneurship. And basically the goal of mine, it was a selfish goal. It was to make financial literacy a graduation requirement. I feel like it's negligence on behalf of a school district in this time and age after a pandemic, knowing what we know about the wealth gap, that it is, I'd almost say it could be a class action lawsuit against a district if they don't make financial literacy a graduation requirement. I really feel that strongly about it. And so we started this club, and instead of asking, I just said, well, here's what the need is. Here's what people want. And so we started the club. We met once a month. I brought in people to talk, whether it's a lender, we talked about all the things that you guys mentioned before. And they're actually going to pilot with EverFi. It's called EverFi is the app. And so then now I believe next year they're going to make a high school part of the junior year social studies, world studies class. There's going to be a unit for EverFi, which is this financial literacy program, and they're plonking it into that required class. But I want more. I want a whole semester class. So we're going to keep working until that happens. So that's one thing that we're working on.
I like that, Dave. I love that that's not the end, right? There is opportunity for more. So thank you for that.
There's two other things along those lines, and we can save it for our breakout session. But at our state association, additional fair housing training was a bill for that was passed this year. And that was one person who really got behind that and pushed it hard and worked it in all the avenues and really advocated for it and got other people on board. But basically, like, how many people have you talked to this year who have said, oh my gosh, The Color of Law should be required reading? It should be part of our licensing. Like that is a book that you should read and understand to be a realtor in America, period.
Maybe it's a selection of books. Maybe it's like Race for Profit, Color of Law, Urban Renewal, Urban Crisis, like whatever one they want to choose, but they have a selection.
Well, we're still working on the curriculum, but they did get those additional hours passed. it's not enough. It's a beginning though. And I think continuing to look for those things where it's like, hey, this whole conversation we're having about schools, like this needs to be an entire breakout session. We've gone deep on this, obviously having an educator in my world, I've been tuned into this for a long time, but there's so many other, there's so many other facets here. And Obi, I was doing the room transfer. Did you talk about the school ratings thing when I was setting my other computer up?
Nope, didn't. Go for it.
Well, that's your move, but he told us yesterday that they're going to pull school ratings from the website.
We pulled it on Windermere.com, and we want to make sure that that is not part of our vocabulary any longer. We just think it creates a steering moment, and why should we be doing that? If people want to investigate schools, go and do it. Shouldn't be part of our job.
And instead of us treating it like we do crime and other things that we can't touch, where we say, ooh, I really am not allowed to talk to you about schools. I think we have to look at it and say it is part of my job, since we know how tightly interwoven schools and real estate values are, to both interrogate what we understand about our local district, the schools that we tend to know since we sell in our own communities many times and don't understand, the other schools and the other programs that are offered. Like that's the kind of continuing education that we need to take upon ourselves. And that will change the way you see your community, see and serve your community, I would say. So.
And you're going to tell them about, so we also, one last thing, and just real quick, we have just we have a jumpstart part of our budget where we have money to set aside to bring someone in, like Obi had touched on, and we're currently doing that right now. We're piloting the program, and hopefully we can make it go more widespread across the company, but to bring in a Black or brown underrepresented population person and give them exposure and give them a stipend every month. And because we know that it's a struggle just to even get started for anybody in real estate. So they have some wind behind their back.
It takes more than just wanting it.
Yeah. Wow. You guys are an inspiration, I have to say that. So thank you for all that you're doing. For those that are listening into the panelists, here's the thing that I always say: you don't have to recreate the wheel. And the people that you see on the screen are absolutely approachable in 100% respect of the word. So if you have questions, follow up, you want to pick their brain, Dave, I think we have a content creator that has already put her contact information in the chat for you. She's happy to get the curriculum written for you. These are the things where we can partner together. It doesn't matter that, there's an initiative in a different state and it's not here in Colorado. If you want to see it in Colorado, if you want to see it within your community and your county, reach out to the folks that we have on the calls today. Bill, I'm not letting you off the hook. I would like to wrap up with you. Any parting words for our industry?
Well, I just want to mention the role of the MLS before we go.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
If I understand it right, in essence, usually it's the brokerages, the realtors who own the MLS, and in our tests, our testers, home buyers, would meet with an agent. The agent would interview them for a few minutes and then would turn to the screen to generate lists, to start to sign them up for listings, right? Would start clicking on communities and schools for them to receive listings. And if you think about it, that's the moment where steering is happening. Some of these screening and pre-approval issues have happened before that, but that's when screening happened, which means that the MLS has that information in it, which means that a broker could insist that the MLS send them a report every month about which districts and schools and communities your agents are choosing and which ones they're not choosing, which that monthly report could be the basis for a conversation with your agents about why this person got those communities, why didn't they get these other communities? And, in other words, brokers, I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, we don't get that information or that information isn't sent to us. Well, you own it, you could insist on it. So think of active steps to get that information. I hope that plants a seed in your mind.
Huge, actually. Yes, I think it just planted an acorn. So thank you. So that goes back to the risk management piece, right, that we discussed earlier. If we really want to have an active role in seeing what the agents within the brokerage are doing, the searches they're doing, the most popular searches they have, maybe they never check on a specific school district or a specific school. Is that posing a problem? But at least we'd have that data to begin.
And it might be better to see it now before it ends up in court, when the seller's agents representing communities in communities that are being steered around, on the day when that community and those agents sue the brokerages that are steering around them for harming the communities and their buyers, that MLS information will end up in court. Better for you to see it now than then.
Great tip. Wow. Great tip. And basically, Bill, what I take from that, it's just a matter of time. And Ann, I think you touched on it as well, right? It's a matter of time. We may not see it yet, but and maybe Dave, you touched on it as well. When you're talking about the class action lawsuits, it's there if someone wants to go down that path. Beautiful. Okay, so we are a few moments behind schedule, but that's okay because I think that we had so much value. For those that are watching, I hope that you had tremendous value. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing in the chat while I give you just directions on our next breakout session. Drop your biggest aha, your takeaway. And I also want to remind everyone, especially if you have to hop off early, you can download the chat so that you can access that in the future. So if I noticed there's a tremendous amount of resources that Bill's been able to drop in our chat box for you. If you want to review that later, the three little dots in the corner of your chat box, click on it, it says more, click save, and you'll have access to that. We'll also have a follow-up email with the recording that you guys can have access to if you want to come back or even share it in an office meeting or with other agents that you work with in the community. So with that, we're going to have 2 breakout rooms. Ann is going to help us in facilitating our first room, and she is going to chat about fair housing on the brokerage level. So if you serve at that brokerage level as a leader, a managing broker, owner, or you have a desire to, or you're just interested in having that knowledge, feel free to head out to breakout room. It says 3, but I think it might be 1, but if it's not, it's 3. And then we'll also have breakout room 4 that is going to have the conversation on fair housing from the agent level. And Dave is going to lead that discussion for us. So if you would, Holly, you can go ahead and open up the breakout.
So as everybody can see in the background, we threw up our fair housing protected class. So as Dave is addressing some of these questions, we can have an idea of exactly what we're talking about as far as protected classes. Let me get my view back up here. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Our topic is, I'm going to call it the water cooler talk, is what I'm going to put on. This was one of the subjects that I was kind of passionate about in our work group on putting this together. So I'm going to throw I think is a penetrating question to Dave first, but I really want to remind everybody to chat it, to talk to us, to use Dave's knowledge to help us become better realtors. So this is kind of my question, Dave, to you. So this is the one that I came up with, is at the water cooler. We seem that it could be casual, innocent talk, if you will, but from your perspective, why is it important that agents maintain compliance with fair housing regulations? What I've seen personally is, oh, we don't have a diversity problem. We don't have this. But then they go outside and then, the very first thing you see is their fair housing logo on something. But it's walking the walk and talking the talk that us as individual agents. So, how can we stay compliant with fair housing regulations when engaging in casual office chit chat?
I think, and I'm going to use and first of all, thank you for everyone for coming in here. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert in anything. I just happen to have a disposition and education around something that I live. It's a lived experience. And so I appreciate y'all listening and tapping in. I like to look at it like it's kind of like with the pandemic. I always said, like, wouldn't our conversations be different if we just ask someone, how has this impacted you? Like starting with a question as opposed to diving into like what it is that we think or where we're at in it, because we all went through the same thing and it impacted everyone differently. So when it comes to something like a fair housing, when we talk about these fair housing issues and these water cooler talk, I usually like to say, oh, that's interesting. That hasn't been my experience. Or, I have a line of questioning, or I come with curiosity as opposed to like, that's wrong. Because if I want to get someone to move, I'm going to be honest, I have a PhD in making white men feel safe. Like, because I have to do that in order to like get where I need to get in a conversation or do whatever. For real, I'm not even joking. But like that, like creating safety first so that you can have that conversation, that's part of meeting people where they're at. You're not just going to change somebody like right then and there and just say, oh, that's wrong, because they have a value set too that they've been going off of. And so that's going to be a shock to the system. So I try to come with a question or a lived experience moment. And so that's how I usually try to approach those situations.
So I've got a follow-up question with that. Is another big topic of conversation, we'll talk about the feeling safe and comfortable, is in those environments, you know, if I hear that is, you know, we hear talk that is not appropriate, that we don't like, you know, I feel uncomfortable calling somebody out. I feel uncomfortable broaching this topic of fair housing or diversity and inclusion. And the specific question is how can we foster an environment that allows real estate agents, consumers space where they feel comfortable and safe talking about this issue?
Well, I honestly believe it has to come from ownership. Like, it seems like we're trying to make this change from the bottom. And what I've learned is, like, I'm even sitting here in this color, like, I think I'm only here because I'm an owner. Like, if I was a broker, it would take me a much longer time to get to this point where I'm talking to people across the nation about this. So I think it's on ownership to really speak up, and then that will trickle down, hopefully, through the other owners in that company, whether it's Windermere or Compass or EXP or Remax or whoever your brokerage is. I believe it has to start from up top. Like, if we're talking about a widespread change. Now, individually, what agents can do specifically, I think, is finding the people. I like to call it, when I was a principal, watering the green spots. A lot of times we like to look at, you know, the brown spots and focus on that, but I like to call it watering the green spots. So who else in your brokerage or in your office like shares a similar sentiment or has a similar mindset? You don't have to agree on everything. You don't even have to be the same political affiliation. I don't care about that. I just care about humanity. Like, are we going to discriminate against people here? And having some of those deep conversations. We have a DEI. We actually paid for DEI training every month this year. We have 2 different sessions every month. And last one, I was talking about the transgender sports banning, and that uncovers a lot of biases. You got people like that are so against racism, but then I was like, I'm not in the business of discriminating against a group of people. So bring up the transgender in sports, and I guarantee you're going to have a very deep conversation. You're going to see a lot of biases come out that are based off of nothing. They're based off of just value systems that we've been taught. So we just have those conversations all the time, and we challenge, and we just make sure that people know that when they come in, we're going to have those. That's what we're about.
So I don't want to be the only one asking questions here, because I've got a load of them. So I want to open it up to the floor. What questions, what issues, what things are we experiencing that we can talk about? This is a safe space that we need to be able to talk about this candidly. What things are we experiencing that us as a collective can learn from and do better?
Definitely. I'd love to hear from everyone else. I talk enough. I like to hear what y'all have. The talent is in the room.
Of course it is.
So I'll speak. My name is Marina. I am co-chair for our Government Affairs Committee, and our board doesn't have a diversity and inclusion committee or a lot of thought, and we do have a lot of bias up here in Northern Colorado. As an individual broker, because I'm with EXP, so I don't have a brokerage that I go to, what is the one thing besides education that we can bring as an individual to our communities?
One thing that you can bring to your communities in terms of DEI, like inclusivity and all that?
Yes.
one thing that I would, well, I guess I have more questions. I would say like, what does that look like online? Because that's a 24/7, 365 reader board for what you stand for, what you do, or who you are. Like if you went to my Instagram, you wouldn't see real estate. You'd be like, I don't even know this guy is in real estate, but you'd see it in splashes. But you get to really truly know what I'm about. The second thing is, diving into that community and highlighting the community. Where can you highlight the community where the disparities exist? So what I had that same question as you, and when I first got in, because I didn't know where I stood in real estate, like because I was coming in I was fresh and new, and my wife was this superstar. So I went to my high school or our neighborhood school, and I called it Foss Fridays, #Foss Fridays. You can go find it on Facebook. And I just went through there and I went live because it had this, people thought it was like this dangerous place. And I'm like, I'm here every week and I'm going to highlight everyone. I'm going to bring you inside the cafeteria every single week. And this is what it looks like. It's school, just like every other school. So I guess that would be one thing. We have a lot of tools that we can broadcast and go live at places, or go to like an event and go live and just started bringing awareness. I guess the first part is awareness within your company, within your community. How are you doing that? Whether it's live, if you're not in front of cameras and don't like to do that, great, do a podcast. Just any way that you can get that message out there and bring awareness to your sphere, your people, because that's all you can really control. Can't really control a company, but you can control your community. You can control who you hang out with. You can control the people you have just right in your direct contact with.
I'd like to chime in, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that 100%. You can't foster change from the higher levels unless you're willing to have those difficult conversations. And I have found that having those difficult conversations in a professional environment, you're walking on eggshells, because on one hand, you're afraid to disrupt office policy. On the other hand, you want to invoke change amongst your colleagues. You want to see this change happen, and the only way to do it is to kind of be that outspoken one. And we have the opportunity. We have the opportunity to have these conversations every single day with someone new. And if you have that conversation with somebody every single day, how quick could change happen? So much quicker than to take a back seat and be afraid to say something that may make somebody uncomfortable. I've always been the type to say, hey, if you're uncomfortable, this conversation needs to happen. Simple as that.
I wonder also what it would be like if you just sent an email and asked for a sit down with the broker, the office lead in your office. And I know you're with EXP, I think it was Marina that spoke and had the question. I wonder who your regional Desic DB is, or whoever that is, and emailing them and say, hey, can we get some time to sit down? And I have some things I'd like to talk about. Where are we at on this?
Thank you. That was good. That's good feedback.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Other questions?
I'll jump in. Michael, I'm a director at Smedra on all kinds of committees. And my past, and I'm just going to make this quickly so I can tell you where I come from. Served in the United States Marine Corps, lived with racism. I touched probably everybody's life, lead engineer over the trains at DIA, lead assistant project manager over the international trains of Houston. I have seen racism at its highest degree. I have been the only African-American, one or two at the highest level in businesses. My thing that I always see, and I'm always glad to see this, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be David and Michael speaking. I know he's in here, but at the end of the day, when things have to be changed, it's not going to be David or Michael. I have walked that walk. I'm a real estate agent for a reason, because when I spoke up, and I'm not scared to speak up, but my father made it clear to me when I decided to make those moves, I probably would never get promoted again. I jumped him one time, but once the contract, I was done. I was not going to get rehired anymore in the transportation company because I spoke up. for some that I clearly knew was wrong, but it needed others that did not look like me to say something, and they said nothing.
I'm muted. Am I good to go? Nope, you're not. And we're good. Okay, beautiful. And Lisa, are you our person for this room? I think you may be our person in this room. Lisa will help us in taking notes. So
I am.
And we're going to talk. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Welcome, Lisa, and thank you for everything that you're doing. And we'll jump right in because we are a little bit behind schedule, but you guys had so much value add in the panel discussion. I want to thank you. And I want to thank you for your focus and initiative just in leading your brokerage. So we'll jump in. Before we start, I do have a couple of questions for you, but do you have any key points that you wanted to touch on in terms of fair housing from the brokerage level before we jump into questions or Q&A?
I just want to throw out that one of the things we didn't get to talk about is my adamant belief that love letters and pocket listings perpetuate segregation in housing. So would love to see leadership. And I mean, it's a conversation we're in constantly. So I'd love to talk about that.
Absolutely. The floor is yours. Please, let's dive right in. I have a personal opinion on that too, but this is your opportunity, so you go right ahead.
Well, and operating in Washington State, we aren't allowed to do coming soons, so that our MLS does not allow that. So we're operating in a little different environment, so we haven't had to deal with that as much. I'm grateful for that. But even like exclusive listings inside of the firm, you know, I think when you understand this history and you know that certain populations, just like Bill was talking about, are steered away from communities, if your pocket listings often are sold within that existing sphere. Love letters perpetuate, you know, sellers selling to people who they feel comfortable and familiar with, or maybe they're a friend of their neighbors' children, which by the way, they're allowed to under fair housing guidelines, but that doesn't mean it is not perpetuating the segregation patterns in that neighborhood. So I think we have to be strong in creating policies around that at our brokerage levels and at our association, hopefully.
Absolutely. And do you currently have that policy in place with your office?
So what we've done this year is spent a ton of time educating around the potential harm on love letters, and we move towards a request that our agents sit down, review the fair housing information, really talk to their sellers about what the implications could be, and then have their sellers make a choice instead of just saying, do you want to receive love letters or not? And like so many things in a contract, the client's sort of like, I don't know, what's the harm going to be? But once you take them through those steps, and you say, you know, these can potentially contribute to unintentional discrimination in many cases, they say, you know what, actually, we're good. That's not what we're here to do. We just want the best possible offer. And so we have them sign something that they're tapping out on that. And then we're putting out that information to the public or in the agent remarks saying, seller prefers to not receive love letters. Please don't send. Because you can stop a lot before it ever even starts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll share one quick story. It wasn't my experience. Another agent shared this experience with me, but they were reviewing the offers and the attachment to the offer said pre-qual letter. And when the agent opened the pre-qual letter, it was actually a photo of the family.
Yep.
So the intention behind that, right? When you think about that, the intention behind that is let's paint this picture that it's a family that wants to purchase this home, and here's what they look like, so that you can create the story and narrative, and it's no longer about the property and that transaction. It's more about that emotional pull and violating, you know, fair housing law.
And it's hard because when you run a brokerage like ours, where we're very open about our position and our desire to be inclusive of everyone in our community, the flip side is sometimes true. I've had clients say, hey, Ann, we would love to sell our home to a family of color. I'd love to sell, you know, educated white buyers I've had who are like, I would love to sell to a Muslim family. And I'm like, actually, we can't target them in our
do that. Exactly. You still can't do that. Yes.
But I do wonder if, you know, in engaging in these conversations, will we get to a point where we're able to say, you know what, maybe somebody wants to put their home, you know, into a land trust, and maybe they want to create those kinds of opportunities. Like, we haven't really even gotten to the solutions yet, the bigger picture solutions for how we're going to right these wrongs. We're just trying to stop the active discrimination at this point. And then, you know, once we do that, we can move into something that really does invite more people into home ownership.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. And that's the position that we've taken at the state level with diversity and inclusion. It's we have to start with education, right? There's a huge segment of our membership that doesn't realize that there's a problem, or they may have problems within the communities that they serve. So let's just start by educating, making sure that we can, kind of pull the brake on where we are and
Yeah.
have strategic plans on moving forward and what it looks like.
And the school example is one that everybody can get their head around. I think that if you really look at it critically, instead of saying this is fact,
Yes.
when we take I think somebody in the chat, and I don't mean to embarrass anyone, but somebody in the chat said, why would the state intentionally release biased ratings? And it's again, this is sort of akin to, I'm not saying you as an individual are racist. I'm saying like these systems are racist, and if we don't interrogate them and look at how we're going to change them, we're never going to improve the conditions. And so, schools are a really easy example that way. Real estate has some of the same dynamics. And so one thing we did, for instance, at the association level, our state association met because we had an incident last year involving my district senator and a racist mailing that went out and was funded by our PAC dollars. And so it set about a really important conversation within our association and led to the creation of some guidelines for who was going to receive our PAC money. Who, if you were going to get this, it wasn't going to get used in this way. You didn't get to send out racist mailers. It didn't matter whether you sent 25,000 to the Dems and 25,000 to the Republicans, and it got, everybody got even money. The end product that has our name on it as realtors should not ever cross that line. And if it does, what's our game plan for it? And I think that's for us to look at the brokerage level as well.
Absolutely.
How are we holding our people accountable?
Absolutely. And I know that conversation has happened at the state level for leadership for Colorado as well. So right on track. And I know that.
Sorry, go ahead, Natalie.
I was going to say, I have a couple of questions for you, but I feel that we probably have some attendees that have questions. I'd like to open it up for discussion before I dive in, just asking, just the questions that I have for you. So anyone on the call have any questions for Anne, or even follow-up questions from the panel discussion that you want her to dive into? If so, just unmute yourself. Casey, go. Oh, hi, Casey.
Hi, how are you? I'm just going to kind of talk from a level of someone who was raised by parents who survived forced labor, who was taught how to look at people from the inside out, not the outside in. There's systemic issues here that have been generational. And the thing is, in the school system, it's wonderful to do that, but history has always been taught very poorly in this country. And we can kind of see the repercussions of that from what happened from 2015 to 2020. And the thing is, even when we talk about leadership, each of us needs to be a leader, not only the team leader or whoever's the managing broker, but that should be ingrained in every single person in the company. It seems like you're gearing towards that. I have left home at 17. I have a very diverse background. I have friends from all different nations, all different backgrounds, disciplines, ethnicity. And we've taught our boys that same teaching. I'm just going to give you a quick little story. I finished a house for a deputy sheriff. Before he was a deputy sheriff, he was worked for a private security detail who, when Prince Faisal came over to the US with his 2 suitcases full of $1 million, he was in charge of his young son, 5-year-old. They were at a restaurant, and the waiter somehow had managed to make this little 5-year-old angry, and he called him by his name or his nickname, says, "You shoot him now." He says, "We don't do that in this country." He says, "Well, we'll take him to my country and hang him." So it doesn't really matter what country you're from. That's been inherent in this country, and it still is inherent in this country, as we've seen, like I said, over the last 6 years of that hate. I was raised in Buffalo, New York. I went to a school that was half black, half white. We made the front page of the paper every month for race riots, shooting, stabbings, the whole 9 yards. But I had friends from, black friends. I had friends from Puerto Rico, Chinese. It didn't matter. But those are the things that need to be instilled in our future generations. And that has to be taught from an early age.
Yeah. Thank you, Casey. I appreciate that. I facilitate the At Home with Diversity course, and I see a couple of realtors on that have taken that course, and it comes back to that when we talk about the melting pot or the salad, right? The chopped salad. It doesn't matter what your view is. The fact is we're all in the same bowl, right? You can create and uphold and maintain your individuality and still be a piece of, but regardless of it, at the end of the day, we're all part of this. In this term, it's community, right? The communities that we work in, that we're serving, and we're leading. I think, Casey, you hit the nail on the head, that we are leaders within. Thank you. John, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, Ann. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the things about somebody who facilitated a session for us took that a step further and said, evolve it from the melting pot to the mosaic. And give people room to be exactly who they are. And I think that's one of our opportunities, talking about this from a brokerage level, is to understand that often people who are underrepresented in the industry have been expected to fold in the office environment. They're expected to adopt the culture of what a realtor, looks like, sounds like, acts like, instead of being evaluated on their individual strengths and their relationship with their community. There's sort of this narrow profile, and that's one of the really actionable things I think we can do, is to just examine what we hold up as a professional, and really say, like, is that the only version of this that works? I'm challenged constantly. It's not like I've mastered this work. Dave and I have been married for 20 years. We've known each other since we were small children. We have 2 sons together. I am learning and humbled all the time. So it's not about arriving, but I think we need to open things up in a big way.
I love that. Thank you, Ann. That was actually my aha that you shared in the panel discussion, is allowing agents to show up as they are, who they are. I think that's fabulous. Thank you. John, you've unmuted yourself. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natalie. So, and I also teach for the Seattle King County Association of Realtors, as well as Smidra, and I've had a lot of you guys in classes. And one of the things that I know we've talked about in classes up there, as well as down here, especially in the multiple offer market, to avoid this, obviously one was, how do you work around in the listing presentation to not get into the love letter side? And I know Annie Fitzsimmons speaks pretty heavily to that. Scott Peterson in Colorado follows those same guidelines about having conversation with seller to avoid that. But one of the things I know that we've all looked at pretty heavily was having a spreadsheet for doing those presentations, but how do we then present the whole contract? And I just want to kind of see, Natalie and Ann and maybe other people, one of the things that we've tried to pose in different areas is it effective, or is it possible to go ahead and have a redacted or a seller's name or a buyer's name just not being the initial part of it? And that way it is the offer for the sake of the offer, period. And I'm obviously, there's a lot of other conversations around underrepresented markets and numbers of offices and brokers and things like that. But I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts are, just because that came up in conversation about, like, what are we doing and how do we avoid that with love letters? And I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts are on.
Okay. Justin, I think you're up and you're ready to go. I am going to turn over this final segment of our time together today to Justin Knoll, former chair for the Colorado Association of Realtors, coach and leader extraordinaire. Justin, I'm so glad that you are able to join us. You have played a tremendous role in diversity and inclusion initiatives for the Colorado Association of Realtors. So I thought that it would be so important to just have you join us today and kind of share the last segment of where are we going? What does it look like? So Justin, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you guys so much. First of all, I was telling Holly during a break, holy cow, you guys brought the fire. This raised the bar, hopefully in the state and around the nation. I hope this continues. This was the vision when we think about doing something like this, but you never know if it's going to happen, right? You have this idea and you hope it comes to life. So kudos to everybody that's been a part of this, the speakers, just unbelievable. I have scribbled notes everywhere. So thank you for upping the game. I had all kinds of things prepared to say, and I don't get nervous very often when I speak. And I was telling Holly, after these folks in the panel and everybody that's on here, I'm a little bit nervous today. I don't usually get this. So it's fantastic to have that nerve, and it really does up the game. So I think where I can go is, why this was important, it was almost shocking to me that we didn't have something like this in place after all these years, right? The diversity and inclusion aspect of this we had on the local level, but then when you look at the state, it was eye-opening that we didn't have something like this. So that became an immediate initiative of mine. And speaking to Tyrone and staff and our leadership team, they breathed life into this, and there was energy around it. And that really got us all excited. And special thanks to the people that were on that first task force. It was a task force to begin with, which the task force doesn't have a budget, right? You just meet and you have ideas and you hope that you can get the ear of the board of directors and they take some bit of action, but it's not always a sure thing. And so I knew it was important that we turn this into a committee at some point as quickly as possible. So we fought like heck to get to that point, and here we are as a committee. And what that does is gives an actual budget that you guys can work with. And you guys got a $5,000 grant to do this meeting today. And that just shows you how much energy there is around this. So keep using the budget, keep asking for grants, keep doing stuff like this. Obviously the audience is here and we're getting better from this. So I'm just so excited about that. But it's one thing to talk about where we were, but I'm more interested about where we're going, right? So I have two stepdaughters that are just amazing, a senior that just graduated and a new to be sophomore in high school. And our conversations with them are very high level. They're big thinkers. They are very fair in their mind. And we talk about things like fair housing. We talk about redlining in the past, and they are just enamored by real estate. And, I don't know if they'll get into it, but we have deep conversations. And what gives me a lot of hope is that they just look at us and go, are you kidding me? This was a thing. And all of their peers kind of go that way too. And I think that's something exciting, and we need to do a better job. I love the financial literacy piece of getting schools involved. It should be something that you have when you graduate high school. I know when we were in Boston one year, Boston actually starts a savings account, funds a $50 savings account for every child that's born, because they study the data, and the data shows if the account is already open, people will put money into it. It's the barrier of opening the account, walking into a bank and actually physically opening an account. So when that account is open, it increases what's saved. It increases their chances of having the life they want, and increases the chances that they're going to spend some of that money on higher education within the city there in Boston. So it's a really cool program, and I'd love to keep seeing some of that going. So I think that's going to be a big piece going forward. We've got to continue doing things like this. We have to go where people are. And I think after COVID, it's been very difficult to get on Zooms and do these meetings. But now we can get out and do these. So Natalie will probably, or I will give you some resources that CAR has coming up for the fall forum that I hope everybody on this call jumps in and gets on. It's going to be extraordinary. So it can't stop here. We have to keep going with this. I wrote some things just about kind of the things that I've done. I've led a lot in my career. My grandmother I come from a family of action. So my grandmother was the president of the South Adams County Water Board, and for decades. And that's Commerce City. And it was surrounded by the Rocky Mountain Arsenal. And I grew up in that neighborhood. I grew up in that town. My uncle was an 8-year mayor there. And so the family of action took action and said, this is not okay to have contaminated water where people have to stand in line to fill jugs of fresh water just because they can't have fresh drinking water at their own home. That is a huge systemic problem. And that was the first realization for me and discussions in my family that this is not a fair playing field. This is not level. And so from that point forward in my career, I've always tried to find that level playing field as often as possible. So she did take action. She fought with the Army and Shell Oil for years and years. And finally, they acquiesced and agreed to build a state-of-the-art water treatment facility plant that's today at 72nd in Quebec and Commerce City and runs the cleanest water through the metro area. And they named it after her, which is really cool. But that's where we come from. And that's hopefully where you guys come from. Is it just takes one person. She didn't have a high school education, but she had gumption. And she had a lot of nerve to get in people's face and say things and speak on behalf of those that couldn't speak for themselves. And I think what we can do, each one of us can do, is see the world from a different perspective, which is what I try and do on a daily basis. I try and immerse myself into somebody else's perspective and go, wow, that is so different from mine. I've got to change some things. So I wanted something that would last. I wanted the leadership team to create something that would last. And clearly we've done that. So kudos to the leadership team and you guys for keeping it going. It's just incredible. I'd made some, I don't want to say enemies throughout that, but pushing for this to be a committee and pushing for this to be a part of the Colorado Association was not a slam dunk, guys. There was a lot of pushback from people. And that was disheartening, but we use that friction as fuel. Of all the days, the doorbell rang.
You're good, Justin. That's awesome. Our dogs like to make an appearance when we're on chat all day. So while Justin takes care of the delivery that's coming in, Justin mentioned we'll get additional resources out to you. And I am so appreciative of the initiative, the task force that was created, and leadership continuing to move forward with the initiative to have the diversity and inclusion committee, can actually become a committee versus a task force, because if we had not, we wouldn't have events like the events that we had today and the events that we have coming down the pipeline. There you go, Justin. There you go. Look at that.
My dog is really a sweet dog, but he sounds like the devil when the doorbell rings. So my apologies for that, guys. What bad timing that is.
It's okay. I am tempted to put like the sleeping baby sign on my door because if you get the dog going, it's not good news in my
lights
world.
out. He's just staring at me like, are you not getting the door? What's going on? But I ask myself questions every day, and I've done this for the last 3 years, and it's really helped. And my goal is to be a better person and more empathetic to others. So there's things I do to elevate my mindset daily to get into a different place, right? Listen more, ask deeper questions, and talk less, which is hard for me at times. Get uncomfortable in my own skin. That's been a big thing, is I can't be comfortable every day in who I am. I've got to get out and understand that there are people that are way more uncomfortable in their skin, and I've got to see that and feel that. I do consume real facts and use them to educate. Especially in today's world, find the real and get it out to others. Be a leader where you are, no matter what it is. Be a better human today. Every morning I walk the dog, there he is, and I get to the house next door, and every morning I tell myself, today I'm going to be a better human. And I don't always win, or I don't always achieve that, but at least I'm getting that going in my mind. And the last thing for me is I go where people are. Not just physically, but mentally and spiritually, and I just try and learn as much as I can. The next part is the skill set, you guys. So there's mindset, and there's skill set, and there's action, and those three things should work together all the time. But that mindset is you guys asking those questions. It's getting your head around where other people are. The skill set is something that CAR and your local associations are really bringing the heat with right now, especially CAR. And so I want to share with you guys some things that are coming up that you guys should be tuned in for. Natalie, if you want to jump in on this stuff as well. I know this is a huge push for what you've got going in your term coming up. So.
Absolutely. I'm happy to dive in. So Justin, I appreciate it. And I think you're exactly right as far as having the focus. It's the mindset piece that we're focusing on, the dialogue, the conversation. I've had many of conversations where I get uncomfortable and my armpits start to sweat, right? And it's like, okay, we're doing this, we're having this conversation, but like we started our time together this morning, when you come from a place, when you approach those conversations with respect and from a place of curiosity, I always walk away just learning more, knowing more. But in terms of what we have going on at the state level, and it's open to everyone. So if you have friends, associates in the office, your managing broker and owner, maybe they weren't able to join us today, we have lots of other opportunities for you guys to get involved. So we are going to do a free gentrification workshop on July 13th from 10 to 11:30. And so that is already set. We'll get registration information out to everyone. I know in the gentrification work group breakout that we had earlier today, the conversation continued. So I know there's more that needs to be said and conversations that need to be had. So mark your calendar, join us for that. We'd love to see you join us for the gentrification piece. We do have Fall Forum. Justin, do you want to touch on Fall Forum? We have a couple of opportunities at Fall Forum as well for you to continue your learning.
Yeah, so Fall Forum number 1 is October at the Broadmoor. We're going back to the Broadmoor, baby. 100-year anniversary of CAR, which is just extraordinary. So check out the fall forum. The diversity committee has selected 2 breakout speakers, October 17th and October 18th. So this conversation is going to continue. It will not die here. We are bringing it even further. So those are going to be at the fall forum, again, at the Broadmoor. October 17th and 18th is when this committee is having speakers. Holy cow.
Thank you, Justin.
Keep going.
Yeah.
So much.
No, that's great. No, we do have a ton, but Holly just mentioned that the registration opens tomorrow, so you guys can keep an eye out for that link as well. If you guys have had to hop off and come back in, first before I even say this, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. I understand the market that we're in. I understand how busy everyone is. So for you to make this a priority on your schedule, thank you. But if you had to hop off and come back on, know that this session, the full key sessions were all recorded. The breakouts were also recorded. We're going to compile all of that and house that on YouTube. Again, play it at your office meeting, share it on social media, send it out to your realtor partners and friends in other states. I think that there was so much value. I had nuggets and chills along today's presentation. So hopefully you guys had the same experience. We'll have that YouTube on the CAR YouTube page. We'll also embed that into the follow-up email that will have all of the resources, speaker contact information that was touched on today. I think, yes.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
That's it. Okay. It's all yours, Justin. You go right ahead.
You're good at this. No, I'm just excited, friends. I when we first talked about this as an idea, who would have thunk, right? Who would have thunk in this short amount of time we could get to this place? And I'm just excited for what's to come. Keep bringing ideas. This committee needs ideas. They need introductions to other people. They need fresh perspective. And that's the one thing that we can control in our brains is what kind of perspective we let in and what kind of perspective we look out with. So just stay involved, get involved in anything that you can. There's so much to do and there's so much need out there. So keep going, friends. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate you so much. You have no idea. Everyone, that we did go a little over and I apologize again, but again, I'm hoping that you had some takeaways and some nuggets. I cannot wrap up this session without acknowledging and thanking Jason Witt, who was the leader for this workshop. Jason, if you could, you didn't get to unmute for the greater group, so if you could just come on and just leave us with our parting words.
Sure.
Which is completely off script, so Holly is probably freaking out. So it's okay.
He is. Hey, I first of all, Justin, thank you for the speech that you gave us, because change does happen with us. As I got into this, I was very timid with dealing with diversity and inclusion, and then the fair housing issue. I didn't know where to go or what to do. But if you have a passion, you'll find it. And as we keep talking, that the change starts here. We are the magic. We are the miracle. We have to be the ones that now take this information and head out the door. We can't just take it and be okay with what we learned. If we don't head out that door and start, like Justin said, with that first step out the house, knowing that we're going to make the change, this class does us no good. We have to take the tools that have been provided to us and make the difference. We have to be the ones that step out. And it is my challenge to everybody that's here is take this wonderful information and go forward. Be that voice, be that person, push the fear aside and go for it. You guys are all great. You're rock stars. We appreciate everything that everybody does and go forward and move up. This is great. Thank you, Natalie.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Holly and staff. And thank you all for taking the time out again. And you guys enjoy the rest of this beautiful toasty week. Have a good one, you guys.
Bye, friends. Thanks, Natalie.
Bye. Thank you.